We can start. Thank you.
Hello, hi everyone. Good morning and welcome to this conference. It is a special honor actually for me and for the team to be able to host you today. Thank you for finding the time and to join us on this launching of a very interesting study that is the regional research on supervision in the context of multidisciplinary teams. In addition, we'll be having as well the launching of the country report. So today we'll have many studies that will be launched and shared with you. Just shortly to introduce myself. My name is Alcheta Lascu. I work for Terdezom Regional Office based in Budapest, and I have been part of the Child Protection Hub for many years now. And I feel really privileged today to be able to host this conference and to have you all here together with a fantastic group of researchers that have been really doing a fantastic job on this research, and will be happy to share the results with you. In terms of some technical details that today will be just sharing with you and for you to take it into consideration, especially for the ones who will need translation. So you can see that in your meeting, in the screen that you have, you have an option of interpretation. And if in this, it's just enough to click there and you can choose the language where you would like to, in which you would like to receive interpretation. And as well, so you have different options. For today, we have the option of interpretation in Romanian, in Albanian, and as well in, you have the Albanian, it is, I think, for both countries, for Albania and Kosovo. As this is a format of mostly of a conference, we'll have the opportunity to we have a section of questions and answers. And you will have the opportunity as well to share and ask to the participants in the chat box what are some of the questions that might be rising in the meanwhile. Why I think it is important for everybody that has interest on this topic. Why was this topic of interest to conduct research on it? So as we assume that many of you are already familiar with ChildHub and the ChildHub platform, supervision actually, it has been considered of a crucial importance when it comes to the quality of the services provided in the child protection setting. And the benefits of supervision are widely recognized by different research and studies, not only for the workers in terms of increasing their professional skills to deal with child protection cases, but as well for the supervisors who are providing supervision, and for the final beneficiaries such as children and families. But what we noticed that in the region, they were missing, it was a missing gap, a missing piece in terms of evidence-based of the supervision practices provided in the region, and that as well that can serve for further recommendations on what is needed to be done further in the countries. So this journey of the study that we'll be launching today has started with a mutual agreement by every country that is involved in ChildHub. So all the associates that I take the opportunity to thank all of them have been agreeing that it was important for ChildHub to be able to work with the team of researchers on providing this so much needed evidence on supervision research. Therefore, we started this journey, and we were lucky enough, if I may say, that we have a great researcher such as Dr. David Wilkins, who joined us the team as a principal investigator, and really will be sharing later on with you all the results of the research. In the meanwhile, just to give you a short intro of the program today. So we'll as I mentioned earlier, not to scare you, but just to give you a bit of hints on what we'll be sharing. We'll have the first presentation that will be done by David on the regional findings of the research. The regional presentation of it includes mostly the findings and recommendations, having this regional perspective more. And later on, we'll be able to continue to the countries presentation, and we'll start with Croatia in the first session. So we have split those in two slots. So we have the first slot of the presentations of Croatia, Romania, and Kosovo. After, we'll have a short coffee break, and we'll move on to the presentations of Albania, Moldova, Serbia, and Bulgaria. As we really didn't want it to be this just of a conference sharing some research, but as well to use this opportunity of having so many people on this virtual room to really be able to brainstorm and discuss together within the country group reflections on what can be done further based on the findings and recommendations of the research to be strengthened the supervision practice within the multidisciplinary settings. And at the end as well, we'll be having a closing word from our dear colleague Judith in terms of the way forwards of ChildHub. So this is the program for today, and we'll start very soon with the most important matter on this. And I would really like to invite Tamas for sharing as well. I think it is everything okay with the technical aspect, Tamas? Because I cannot see no one.
It's working well, Akata.
Okay, thank you. So I stop sharing my screen. You will have today many screens that will be shared. However, just to start with the presentation of, I initially introduced him, David Wilkins. David, he has a PhD actually in social work. He is working as senior lecturer near to Cardiff University. His particular interest and what actually made him to be applying for this consultancy is on supervision. So he's really interested, especially in the matters of supervision in the child protection settings, and more specifically this one on multidisciplinary teams has been really helpful for David as well and for his research interests. He has been leading the whole research together with the country associates, working on the methodology and everything else. And I will be pleased to invite David to share the findings and start his presentation. David?
Well, morning. Thanks, Alketa, and morning, everyone, wherever you're dialing in from or zooming in from to this conference this morning. Really good to see so many people here and interested in the topic of supervision in child protection in particular. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen, and let's hope we don't have any technical hiccups, but certainly not immediately. And I'm also going to launch a poll, which I would like you all to have a look at alongside listening to me, I hope, but so let me launch the poll as well. And I have no idea what that does to the shared screen. I'm sure someone will tell me if it's gone disastrously wrong, Alketa or Tamas, if everything's gone disastrously wrong. Anyway, the poll should be launched as far as I can see, and hopefully you can see my screen and you can hear me as well. So I'm in Cardiff, which is in Wales, which is part of the UK, as I'm sure all of you know. Anyway, it's in the west of the UK. It's quite a cold but sunny morning here in Cardiff, and my dog is bumbling around, and the washing machine may be on in the background, all those sorts of things. Anyway, let's deal with those as we have to. So my background, as Alketa said, I am a lecturer in social work, but previous to that, I was a social worker. I worked mostly in the field of child protection, particularly with disabled children. And I suppose supervision was always an important part of my own practice, and then I was particularly interested as an academic, as a researcher, to learn more about the evidence base for supervision. And I suppose I was surprised to find, that often there is interest in research and supervision, there is interest in the findings, but it's a very complicated topic to research, and so there was scope, to learn more about it. And I was really pleased to be involved with this particular project. My research primarily has been in the UK, as you would probably guess, but I've also done some projects internationally, but never in this part of the world. So it's a shame that it's COVID and that we can't all be together. I would have loved to visit some of these countries. The closest I've been, I think, is Poland. I went and spoke at a conference once in Poland. It was lovely. It would have been nice to visit some other places, but it was not to be. So for this presentation, thank you for those who have started answering the questions. If you could keep going with those, if you haven't already, that would be great, because I'm going to come to the answers or your responses as part of my presentation. So let me see if I can move my slide. Okay, so this is what I'm going to talk to you about in the next sort of 30 minutes or so, with some time for questions, questions at the end. So I'm going to talk to you about, well, I suppose the first thing I want to say actually is to thank the local researchers and the country associates. Alketa mentioned all of them in her introduction, and I have to say they've all been amazing, and have slightly blown my mind. I don't know how you translate that into Serbian, Croat, or the other languages, but anyway, because when we were setting up this project, I emailed Alketa and the rest of the folks at ChildHub, I think probably at least 2 or 3 times, to raise my concerns, really, or to raise the question of how ambitious the data collection was, how ambitious they were being for collecting the data. And I think my purpose in emailing them was to say, are you really sure that we're going to be able to collect this much data in this short amount of time? You'll never find enough good people to do this research at such short notice. And of course, they proved me wrong. And, we found an amazing group of people, and actually exceeded all of the expectations, I think, in terms of the data that we were looking for. So thank you to all the local researchers and country associates. You certainly showed me. So for this presentation, I want to talk first about why we did this research, or at least why I think it was important, building on what Alketa has started to say, a little bit then about how we did it, and then what we found, trying to answer the question of so what, I guess. So, what were the recommendations that emerged, or at least some of the higher level recommendations, and then at the end, I hope people will have questions or comments that you can sort of post in the chat, and we'll try and look at some of those as well. So I'm going to start the sort of presentation proper, if you like, by telling you a little bit about the best supervisor that I ever had. She's recently retired, I guess, which is partly why she was on my mind as I was preparing for this presentation. And she was the team manager of my first ever social work team that I worked at. She gave me my first job as a worker on play schemes for disabled children. More for her, you might say. But anyway, it ended up that we worked together for a number of years, and I qualified as a social worker under her kind of supervision. She was never actually my manager. So in the UK, we have a slightly different setup, as I've learned throughout this project from many of your countries, which is that your supervisor is almost always going to be your manager. And that's seen as a very sort of normal, typical part of how social work teams and child protection teams operate in the UK. And of course, I've seen in this research here, as I'm sure you'll hear more about in the regional finding, and then in the local countries, that's not at all the case in many of your countries. But and so that sort of was making me reflect really on our different understandings of supervision that we have across different countries. And actually, although the person I'm thinking of, the best supervisor I ever had, she wasn't my manager. She was my team manager. She was never my line manager. She was absolutely my supervisor, although I hadn't really thought about that before I did this project. Anyway, she recently retired. She texted me to say she was retiring and could I come to her retirement do, which unfortunately I couldn't, because it was in London, and actually my family had COVID at the time. But anyway, I suppose with any kind of endings, it sort of makes you prone to reminisce a little bit about what people mean to you and sort of the shared experiences that you've had. And she was absolutely an expert social worker. She was an expert supervisor. She was always calm. I remember she would never get flustered, whatever the problem was, whatever was going on with the family, or you were having a crisis at work. She never was flustered. If she was, she managed to seem calm on the surface anyway, which I guess is a skill in itself. She was very reassuring. She knew so much about social work, but she was always open to learning more as well from whoever she worked with. She was supportive but challenging. She cared about you as a worker, but not quite as much as she cared about doing the right thing for children and families. She expected a lot. She had incredibly high standards for what professionals needed to be doing, but she gave you a lot as well. And as I say, she was quite easily the best supervisor I ever had. I hope all of you who are professionals in the field of child protection, whether you're social workers or not, or whatever your professional background is, if you're working in the field of child protection, I hope that all of you would be able to tell a similar story about the best supervisor that you've ever had. I hope it's your current one, but even if not, I hope that you would have a similar story to me, because I think having that person, having these people, having special supervisors to help us and work with us, they make the difference is obvious for us. The difference is obvious for our work, really. And I think, I've done one or two things in my career that I guess I would probably say I'm quite proud of, but much of what I learned about being a good social worker, I learned from this supervisor, from my supervisors generally, and that was the influence that I experienced. And so this is why, I think research into supervision is important. This is why I'm really interested in it. It's because of those kind of experiences and because of the difference that a good supervisor can make for practice, can make for your career, really. And as one of our key informants actually said during his or her interview as part of the project, you can't have social work without supervision. It just doesn't make sense to think of it in those terms. And that's true. And I think you can't have any kind of child protection practice without supervision, actually, or not good, safe, effective child protection practice, the kind that we would want if we were in receipt of social services and the kind of service that we know children and families deserve. So now I feel quite lucky because I get asked to talk about supervision quite often, and I was talking at an event actually in the UK just on Tuesday. What day of the week? It's Thursday, isn't it? I forgot what day of the week it was in. It's Tuesday, and no, it's not. It's Thursday. I spoke on Tuesday at a different event, and one of the things that I like to do, if we can do it, which we can't today, but I'm going to show you a little bit of what I mean here, is that I get people to generate these word clouds, as you can see here, not just because I think they look nice and colourful, but because I think it tells us something about the nature of good supervision. So I'm sure you're familiar with word clouds, but how this one works is that I get people to pick 3 words or short phrases that describe their ideal supervisor or their ideal kind of supervision. And the more people choose the same words, the bigger it appears on the word cloud. And so you generate these kind of images, and they sort of happen as you're watching them. And it's great to see that the words come out. So supportive, for example, understanding, approachable, knowledgeable, those are the sorts of words that people would be saying more and more and more. And the smaller words, are ones where perhaps a smaller number of people are selecting those sorts of words. And those of you that completed the poll or are still looking at the poll this morning may well recognize some of these words. And this is the risk of everything going wrong, I'm going to end the poll and I'm going to try and share with you one of the results. So if I vanish and the Zoom meeting crashes, you'll know why. But let's give it a go. So we've had sort of 80 responses to the poll so far. So let's give this a go. I'm slightly nervous, as you can tell. Okay, so I'm going to share the results. So I don't know if you can see that. I don't really know how that looks on your screen. Can you see, Alketa? I can see you. Can you see that?
We can see still the word cloud.
Okay, maybe I have to stop sharing. Okay, let me stop sharing very briefly, and hopefully you'll be able to see the poll results. I'm going to click share results. Can you see these poll results?
Yes, now yes.
Fantastic. So here you go. So here's a list of words here. You see, I picked the sort of 10 top ones there. Which of these words would you choose to describe your supervisor? So we haven't been able to generate a word cloud because Zoom doesn't do that. But if you look at that, you know, supportive is the biggest one. So actually our word cloud already would have started to look reasonably similar to the one that I just showed you. Knowledgeable is the second, you know, most sort of selected word there. So that would have been our second biggest word. Reflective is also very large there. So, and kind, honest, patient, certainly important aspects, but people choosing those words slightly less. So let me take you back to the word cloud. So we couldn't generate a word cloud, but we did our best with the tools we had. You can see, I hope, that actually the one you just generated would have looked pretty similar if we'd have been able to turn that into a word cloud. And I always find that just really remarkable, because I did this one on Tuesday in the UK with a group of social workers and supervisors from the UK. We've just sort of done something similar with a group of, you know, professionals from across, I don't know how many countries, at least 7, maybe more. And I think our word clouds would have looked remarkably similar. And that's always true. So I think that tells us something important, actually, about this idea of what we think of as good supervision. Is just, you know, it's just very similar and reflective across you know, different countries, as we've shown here, different points in time. I've been doing these word clouds for a few years. They never really change. I could show you a dozen probably, and they would all look the same. So I think that tells us something about this ideal of a good supervisor. And of course, if we have people in our careers and we're able to be knowledgeable, supportive, understanding, available for other people as supervisors, of course, that's the kind of supervisor that we want. And so the question then is what difference does it make when you have access to this person, to this type of supervision? What difference does it make for you as a worker? What difference does it make for your organization? And what difference ultimately does it make for children and families? Still thinking about the question of why, really, why focus on supervision? Here are some quotes. These are from the interviews that we, I'll tell you a little bit more about the methods in a sec. These are some quotes from some of the people that we interviewed as part of this project, both supervisors and supervisees from across the region of all the countries that you're represented from. And these form part of our findings, but I also think they tell us something about why supervision is so important and why it's important to know more about it. So the yellow blob, I can't think of a better word now, the yellow blob at the top left is from a supervisor in Romania, outlining how effective supervision can be. And she said absolutely amazing things happen in supervision if you really create the context for people to open up. And I think that if is important, isn't it? It's doing some work there. So it's not just about saying, let's have a meeting and call it supervision, but it's about creating that context for people to open up. I'm often absolutely amazed and excited by the need that exists, but also the need that goes unmet for this kind of supervision. And the next one, moving down, the quote in blue there, I think that's from a supervisee in Bulgaria. I say I think it is from a supervisee in Bulgaria. I planned this and everything. Noting that, you know, because of the nature of the work, really, because of what it means to work with children when they're experiencing abuse or neglect, when you're working with families that are experiencing difficulties such as mental health problems, you know, poverty or extreme poverty, alcohol misuse, that kind of thing. Of course, that's going to affect you as a worker. You carry that with you when you go and meet the family and when you leave them again. You know, how could it not affect you? It would be worrying to think it's not affecting workers. You know, do we want workers in child protection who aren't affected by those things? That might tell us something about how that worker is finding it hard to cope and is having to shut themselves off from the work. So the work is difficult by its very nature. It's emotional. It involves exposure to suffering, and you know, supervision is certainly part of the answer to how we take care of each other, how we take care of our workforce, so they can do a good job for children and families. I mean, it's dangerous to have favorites, isn't it, right? But probably this quote in purple might be my favorite quote from the whole thing. You always get these kind of quotes that stand out to you. I don't know about you, if you've ever been involved in research. But yeah, dangerous to say favorites. You know, it's a bit like your children, isn't it? I like all of them, but occasionally you have favorites on different days of the week. But anyway, this is my favorite quote here. And it's from a key informant, a child protection unit worker in Albania. And they were talking in their interview about this lack of knowledge or this lack of awareness that there can be around supervision. And she said this: sometimes people don't know what supervision is. It's unheard of. It is unwalked territory. And I just really like that metaphor. This idea that, you know, the landscape of supervision is something that you sort of explore. You know, it kind of conjured visions for me about how you walk with someone else as a supervisor, how you explore things, how you go to places that you might not otherwise be able to go. You know, it sort of broadens your perspective. Anyway, I like this metaphor of this unwalked territory. So that sort of spoke to the need to help people understand what supervision is and to walk that territory, really, to take those first steps. And the final sort of yellow blob on the right is from an NGO worker in Serbia, noting that, you know, as well as being supportive, you know, the emotional turmoil that I sort of talked about before, that actually, you know, supervision is important in other ways as well. It's important for families, not, you know, and because supervision makes a positive difference for families, absolutely. But a less common idea, which I think is highlighted in this blob on the right, is that, you know, workers in the field of child protection actually have, of course, significant responsibilities, and they have significant powers, you know, to make really difficult decisions about whether children are safe, what sort of resources, you know, can be distributed to different families, how to do that fairly, and ultimately, you know, are involved in decisions about whether children are going to be living at home or not. And that may well be the most invasive thing a state government can do to remove a child from his or her family, right? So this idea that actually supervision is important, yes, because it supports the worker, yes, because it creates opportunities, but also because it's about you know, monitoring in that supportive, challenging way around those powers and responsibilities, about ethical practice and about the need to exercise our powers responsibly. So, you know, and that sort of points, I thought that pointed towards this tension really that's at the heart of good child protection work, which is that idea of care and control, of course, and, you know, how do we care for people whilst also having a function to make decisions about the limits of parental freedom. You know, parents can bring up children how they like, but there are limits to that freedom, and that's about keeping children safe and so on. So, you know, supervision being really important as part of that real ethical dilemma, or those dilemmas that lie at the heart of good child protection practice. So, so I think that's why looking at supervision is so important. Okay, so that's sort of why we did it, or at least why I think we did it, and why I particularly do supervision research generally. So this is how we did it. So as I said earlier, the real work of the research was done by this, you're going to hear from many of them later on, this amazing team of local researchers with the support of their country associates. So, you know, the answer to how many surveys or interviews I did is none. Because I sat in Cardiff and watched everyone else do the work from several, you know, 100 miles away. But I'm very happy to take the credit and share the credit for all this amazing data that was collected. So 226 surveys, 40 key informant interviews, 38 Q method interviews. I'll say a little bit more about Q method in a second, because it may be the least familiar of these research methods, and 17 documents analysed. So this is a sizable collection of data. Certainly I think it is. And as I said, bigger than I thought we would get, but I was very happy to be proved hopelessly wrong. The surveys were mostly conducted with supervisors and supervisees, and there were a small group of people who took the survey who weren't getting any supervision, didn't particularly have experience of supervision, but worked in the field of child protection. The key informant interviews were undertaken with a real impressive mixture of people, actually, including, you know, social workers with, I don't know, more years experience in the field than I have years alive, you know, presidents and directors of professional associations, supervision trainers, NGO directors, members of government and NGO commissions, district chiefs, you know, project coordinators. The list is almost endless. I mean, it's not, it's 40 people long, but you know what I mean. And the expertise and experience is, you know, just practically endless. Q method interviews, as I say, for anyone not familiar, they're a really good way of researching and studying people's kind of subjective views and experiences of a topic, in this case, supervision. And so what they involve, again, you know, if people have methodological questions, I'm certainly happy to come back to those at the end. But essentially, you give people a list of statements about supervision, and you ask them to sort them into a grid shape, a bit like the one on the screen there, from the ones they agree with the most to ones they agree with the least. So in total, about 300 people took part. Some people did an interview and a survey, so it doesn't quite add up to the number there in terms of the methods, but just over 300 people took part. And so, of course, I'm only going to present to you really a snapshot of what we found. The reports will be published very, very soon. I know everyone's working away really, really hard on those and getting them done. And I hope, certainly, if you've come along to the conference today, I would hope you'd be interested in those reports. I'm sure you would be. They'll be published in various places. I don't exactly know, but certainly through the ChildHub network, I'm sure you'll be able to find those reports and see Well, if you read it, see if you can spot the favourite quote from the interview that I told you about before, but also some other ones that are gonna hopefully be interesting. Okay, so that's why we did the research. That's how we did the research. Let's look a little bit at what we found. So first of all, some of the basic things that we were kind of interested in looking at is just things like the provision of supervision. So, how frequently is it happening? When did it last happen? How often is it happening for different people in different countries? And so in the survey, one of the questions that we asked supervisors and supervisees was how often have you had supervision in the past 6 months? And we used a scale from 1 to 8, so people could answer from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1 meant they'd had no sessions at all in the last 6 months. 8 indicated 13 or more. So the higher the number, the more frequent the supervision. Basically, that's the key point in terms of what we're looking at in this graph. And so as you can see, the range is reasonably narrow. People were between just under 3 to just over 4 on that. On the scale as I sort of outlined it, which turning that into sort of numbers of sessions means around about 3 to 6 sessions in the past 6 months. So that's 1 session a month. It's 1 session every 2 months. That's pretty much the range that people are telling us about across the 7 countries listed there. As you can see, respondents from Serbia on average had the most access to supervision in the last 6 months, while those from Moldova reported having the least access. And we also asked people, how long ago was your last session of supervision? Was it today, for example? Are you doing the survey, having had supervision this morning, for example? Was it in the past week? Was it in the past month? And so we were trying to triangulate a little bit there in terms of these numbers. So and that was one of the poll questions as well, which I'm going to show you in a second. So what did we find in terms of last supervision session? Well, some people said they had it today, if you like, on the same day they were doing the survey. But most people, which matches up with the numbers on the previous slide, said they'd had it within the last month or longer ago. So that matches, because we were finding essentially people saying, I have supervision about once a month, or sometimes once every 2 months. And that's a good confirmation of the figures on the previous slide, because they kind of match up. So the thing with self-report, of course, you have to be careful because memory can play tricks on you. So it's kind of good to ask questions in a couple of different ways and see if they match up. So I'm just curious to see how that matches up with what the people here found. So I'm going to stop sharing again. I'm going to show you a poll result, and we'll see how much what the comparison is. So bear with me a sec, and I will do that. So hopefully you can see these results again here. I'm looking at Alketa just to see whether you can see this poll result. She's nodding, fantastic, thank you. So when did you last have supervision? So this is 79 people answered our poll this morning. And actually you can see, much more people here saying I've had it in the last few days, I've had it within the past week, so good for you. And then smaller numbers saying they've had it, the past month. But actually still a good 10% of people saying I've never had supervision, which reflects, I think, quite a lot what we found in our survey. So similar, but more people here were saying they'd had it more recently. I'm going to go back and share my screen again. So compared to our findings, if you like, we had more people who were saying they'd had it today and in the past few days probably, but also some people saying they haven't had supervision at all. Okay. We were then asking people, about the content of their supervision. So, you may have had it frequently or infrequently. You may have had it in the last few days. You may have had it a month ago. You may never have had supervision. We were then asking people about the content of supervision and also what it helps with. So from your experience, what are the sorts of things that supervision helps with? Having a lot of supervision or not having much supervision is one thing, but, actually what difference is it making? So here's another graph here. So we asked people, you can see a list of things along the bottom of the graph. So things like decision making, talking about risks and needs and assessments of those kind of things, talking about the children you're working with, talking about the adults you're working with, talking about intervention plans, emotional support. So we asked people, what sorts of things do you talk about in supervision? And we got people to tell us those things. But then we asked them, what sorts of things does your supervision help with, or what does it make the most difference for? So that's what we're looking at with this graph here, is what does supervision help with? And we asked people to say, in relation to each of these things, does supervision help all the time? Does it help a lot? Does it only help a little bit, or does it not help at all? and then you combine the top two ones, so either supervision helps a lot with or it helps all the time, to give you a kind of overall flavour of this is the kind of thing my supervision significantly helps with. So what can we see here? So these are percentages of respondents who agreed that their supervision helped a lot or all the time with this list of things here. And the blue line is overall. So the blue line shows overall for all our respondents how many of them agreed that their supervision helped with these things. The purple line is telling us for just people who provide supervision. So for supervisors, what did they think their supervision helped with? And the yellow line is telling us what workers or supervisees said that their supervision helped with a lot. So what can we see here? I mean, I think the overall takeaway has to be that, you know, the vast majority of respondents agree that supervision helps with all of these range of things. That's the overall finding, of course, from it. I think the lowest overall score here is for developing intervention plans, around about just over 60% of people saying that their supervision helped a lot with intervention plans. Emotional support is around about 75. You got talking about adults is another one just under 70%. But even for those ones, I'm calling them low, but it's low within a context of a very helpful picture of supervision. I think the second thing worth noting about the graph here is that in every case, the purple line is higher than the yellow line. So all the time, supervisors were believing and taking the view that their supervision was more helpful for these things than workers felt. Not by a lot, but by a little bit, and a consistent pattern across there. And I think that tells us something. Of course, when we're delivering a service, whether it's as a supervisor, whether we're delivering a service to families, of course, our intention as professionals in the field of child protection is to be helpful. You know, we come into the job, you know, when we talk to students at Cardiff, I don't know other people from university backgrounds here, what your experience is. When we have our new students join us every September, my first session I always do with them is, why do you want to be a social worker? And the answer, you know, in a sense, I don't need to ask them. The answer is always because I want to help people. And then part of the job of training them is to help them understand how complicated it means to help people in the field of child protection, and what that really means when you say, how do you help people who perhaps don't want your help, you know, or the issues that they need help with are so complicated and so on. So that's how we start it. And so it's not surprising to me that supervisors rate the helpfulness of their supervision slightly higher than workers. That's what they're there. They want to be helpful. Of course, it can be difficult to reflect, but supervisors are among the most reflective group of people in the child protection field, I'm sure. But worth thinking about, you know, there's no absolute objective way of measuring something like helpfulness. That there is something about, you know, do you find it helpful? That's a perfectly valid way of thinking about it. But maybe worth reflecting on, why do we think supervisors and workers have this consistent, slight, modest, but consistent disagreement about the helpfulness of supervision? What might that tell us about how supervision is working, and why do people have these slightly different perspectives? Okay. We then looked at this overall helpfulness of supervision, which we did simply by combining the scores for all the separate areas that I was just talking about. So you just take an average of all those 12 areas, you combine them together, it gives you an overall score for helpfulness. And we can look at that as we're doing here in relation to countries. So you combine all those scores together, the maximum score you could have got was 5, the lowest you could have got was 1. And so we can see this kind of overall averages here in relation to the countries. You can see Albania here, Kosovo on the left, and Serbia, Moldova on the right. Again, the range is narrow. You're talking about a range from just over 2.5 to just under 3.5. So the range is narrow, but there is a difference here between the countries, as you can see. And again, I think this is potentially interesting for all sorts of reasons. Curious to know what people make of it, you know, comments and questions at the end, or of course in your groups. Because if you remember from a couple of slides ago, respondents from Serbia were reporting having the most supervision in the last 6 months. Serbia respondents had the most supervision within the last 6 months out of all these 7 countries. But we're rating here the overall helpfulness of their supervision is low compared to the other countries in the region. So what does that tell us? Well, perhaps it tells us straight away there's no linear relationship between just having more supervision and thinking it's more helpful, right? So just having more of something doesn't necessarily mean it's more helpful, as a very simple kind of interpretation of these results. But of course, why would there be that result? If something's helpful, then you might want more of it. If something also potentially feels a bit like control or a bit like monitoring, or it's actually a little bit stressful, having more of it is not what you want. You want less of that, and this is similar, I think, to what families might say about visits from workers, where that worker is helpful and you're feeling that this is a constructive relationship. Of course, you want to see that worker more and more. Actually, if the worker's coming around and it's quite stressful for your family, of course, you might be quite glad not to see them for a couple of months. So, tells us maybe something about the nature of what's going on in those supervision sessions. So we do want more supervision. I think we're probably all agreed as a team of researchers that, more supervision is what we want, but we want more of effective supervision. We want more of particular types of supervision. We want more of helpful supervision. So I don't know, I don't know all the details just from these two graphs about why we're seeing that difference. And actually, one suggestion that was made to me from the Albanian results is, perhaps if you're hardly having any supervision, then anything is more helpful than not. So, this relationship is likely to be much more complicated than just let's give people more and more and more supervision until that's all they're doing. Actually, maybe a little and often is quite good if the quality is high. Okay, so that's a little summary, if you like, a little flavour of the survey results. Of course, there's much more that we could have talked about. I've just picked out some of those. If we had all day, maybe fortunately for you, I've only been given 30 minutes. So anyway, there'll be more about the surveys in the country results later on, I'm sure, and certainly in the reports. I've forgotten what the agenda is. Am I doing okay for time? I don't know. Okay. Turning now to the qualitative findings, where we had interviews and we had the Q methods that I sort of talked about a little bit. So based on a combination really of those key informant interviews and the Q method study, on this slide you can see this kind of Venn diagram of 3 different variations of supervision that our respondents seem to be talking about. So in other words, when we talk about supervision, what do we mean, and what are the key elements that we think are really, really important to have in effective supervision? How would we know it if we saw it? What are the sorts of things that we might be looking out for? And I think the first thing to say is that there were some very clear areas, very strong consensus really across the region about some very key components, I think, of supervision. So there is some nuanced differences that I'm going to talk about as well. But I think let's not overlook the very clear kind of strong agreement about particularly the 2 things right at the center of the Venn diagram there in the kind of green shaded area, that supervision is absolutely key for managing emotions and supporting people with their emotions, and it's really, really key for professional development. And of course, that reflects a lot of what you find in the international literature on supervision as well. Now, one thing I did find interesting, looking, as something of an external observer to the region, in that sense, being, as I say, from the UK, was the extent to which professional development was seen as so central. And partly that was about, have workers got access to other forms of training? Are there other ways of getting the skills and knowledge that workers need? And if there aren't, then by definition, supervision becomes more important as a way of training, developing knowledge and skills of your staff. I think in the UK, I think there's more of a sense in which supervision can certainly be a forum for professional development, but isn't there to make up for perhaps lack of funding for training or concerns about the extent of sort of qualifying education. They're almost seen as separate things. So that was a difference, I guess I would note, certainly from a UK perspective. But here, particularly across this region, there was a really strong sense that supervision was important for all sorts of reasons, but centrally in order to help workers develop the skills and knowledge that they may not have opportunities to develop without that good supervision. So bearing that in mind, that degree of consensus, because I'm now going to talk to you about differences, but I don't want to misrepresent and say there were radical different views on what effective supervision is. There were some nuances, but there was this core understanding around these 2 elements. So what did we find? Well, I think we found 3 variations, if you like, of supervision, or 3 different ways you might conceptualize it, different things you might focus on within your supervision discussions and relationship. And of course, you could talk about all these things in supervision, and I'm sure people do, but there was that emphasis, just what might be most important to really focus on. And I've called these different variations, as you can see there, the underlined sort of phrases there. One was more focused on actions, one was more focused on curiosity and understanding, and one was more focused on emotions. And of course, then there were shared areas between those variations as well. So I'm going to start with the kind of reddish pink circle at the top left, the action focus one. And so here, if you were hearing a supervision discussion with an orientation of action focused, you'd hear conversations about problem solving, you'd hear conversations about casework with families, you'd hear conversations about, how do we know what to do? How do we find solutions? How do we find our way through these things? And within this kind of focus, workers would learn certainly new things. They would think about their practice and they would think about what things they could do better. And those sorts of conversations would ultimately result in improved, more reasonable, more considered decision-making for the family. So there was a focus there, particularly on, bring your problems to supervision, bring things that you're struggling with in your family work, let's think them through together and let's find solutions to those things. Let's send the worker away with, a plan, an idea of what to do next. That was a kind of action-oriented or action-focused sort of supervision variation that came out of our data collection. The circle at the bottom, which is called emotion-focused, what colour would anyone say that is? I don't know, brown? It's not brown. Anyway, you know the one I mean, the one at the bottom. I don't know what colour that is. It's, shares certainly with action-focused supervision this idea that, let's think about what you could do better. Let's, need some self-awareness from the worker, need some reflection, but was less about casework. The conversation you'd hear would probably be more about the worker, a bit less about their work with the families. It would be talking about things that have gone well, that emotionally supportive idea of let's build your confidence, let's think about things that you're doing well, not just problems that you're having. Let's think about success that you've had. But as I say, more on that idea, we need to take care of the worker. We need to think about the avoidance of burnout. It's about feelings. It's about how this is leaving you at the end of the day in terms of your emotion. And there was a particular idea that group supervision was useful for that in terms of sharing those experiences. You're not alone here. It's not unusual to feel stressed out. It's not unusual to feel like you've not done a good enough job. It's not unusual to worry about, I've left that child at home. I think they're okay, but how can we ever really know what goes on behind closed doors? Those real kind of feelings, I'm going to lose sleep over. That I'm sure many, certainly I had as a child protection worker, when you couldn't switch off your mind, you couldn't switch off from these worries and these running thoughts. So the idea of group supervision as being a kind of normalizing function to say this is the normal reaction to these kind of difficulties. It's not you, it's the work, it's how we do that. And of course, really, really key to avoid burnout. If you're trying to develop your workforce, the last thing you want is high staff turnover. If you've got people coming and going, burning out, how do you build skills and knowledge and institutional expertise if you can't retain your staff group? So really, really important variation and focus of supervision. And then the final one, I'm confident this is a purple circle, curiosity focus at the top right. It was more about thinking, was more about helping workers to kind of step back and consider a different perspective on the work. It's very easy, I think, as a child protection worker, you get stuck into the day-to-day work, your families well, you're busy, you're far too busy most of the time. Actually, supervision being a space to say, let's step back from some of that, very busy nature of the work. Let's look at the broader landscape. Let's think about different perspectives. Are we missing anything here? Is there another way of looking at this issue other than the one that you've brought into supervision? What are the wider range of options? And that was sort of a real strong sort of reflective process within that, really, and also helping workers to learn new things. And that therefore spending time in supervision is really important, because it might be possible, I don't know, it might be possible in some cases to do problem solving quite quickly. What's the problem? Here's an idea, go off and try that. I mean, I'm simplifying obviously, but it could be quite, but actually to be curious just takes time. You can't be curious if you don't have the time to be curious. So there was something about the time spent in there. Another way of sort of understanding these variations is that you've got the sort of top two circles, if you like, the reddish and the purple ones. They're sort of slightly more focused on casework, slightly more focused on being sort of methodological supervision or functional supervision, focused on that casework. And the bottom one definitely was more focused on the worker. As I say, I don't want to overemphasize the differences. Anyone doing any of these types of supervision would agree that workers and families are important. There was definitely not anyone who would say it's one or the other, I don't think. But there were different emphases on that. And that sort of highlights, I think, a key question that did come out from our respondents, from our data, that where there might have been some disagreement, which is the question of this: who ultimately is supervision for? Is it ultimately for the worker, or is it ultimately for the child and his or her family? And that was a difference, actually. that people would have this idea that, who is this ultimate beneficiary? And that would lead you to different conversations in supervision, different emphases on what you might talk about, what you might think is important. So no one said supervision wouldn't benefit both, but it was who's it for? Who's it ultimately for? And there was some disagreement there. And I think that's an interesting one, perhaps to think about and talk about in the groups a bit later on, what people's views are here, if you like, around our virtual table. Some said if you focus too much on the worker, you risk losing sight of the child. And that could be a real concern. Others said that actually, supervision is more akin to something like counselling or therapy for the worker, and the way you help children is by making sure workers are emotionally supported, and it's not really for discussing casework, and that you can lose sight of the worker. So that was a difference. So interesting one to think about potentially. So we also then identified from our qualitative data 4 different supervisor orientations. So the previous Venn diagram, that was about the kind of nature of the conversations you might hear. If you were a fly on the wall in a supervision meeting, what sort of things might you hear people talking about? These were sort of about the person, the supervisor, the way they oriented themselves towards the worker and towards the case. And as shown here in this circle, we sort of labeled these based on some nice quotes that we got from the interviews. That there was supervisor as a mirror, as a companion, as a controller, or as a guide. I say or, actually, that really it should be and, because there was no sense that supervisors would only be one of these things. That actually for different workers at different times, you might need to be more of a companion, more of a controller, more of a guide, more of a mirror, depended on the needs of the worker. So there was that need to be adaptive and flexible in your supervisory role, of course, much as workers have to be. But this idea that you would potentially inhabit these different orientations at different times, and I like the quotes that we found, that's where the names come from. So if we look at mirror, for example, a supervisor from Romania said, "I'm there to listen and hold a mirror up to them," by which they mean the worker, "and ask them questions. Sometimes just by talking about something, things can be set up differently if you ask the right questions." So they're just being a mirror, just asking questions, seeing what the worker does with those questions and how they answer. I'm not there to tell them what to do. I'm not there to to give them the right solutions. I'm there to be a mirror. It's a relatively passive form of supervision, but no less effective format. A companion, again, on the more passive side of what a supervisor might conceptualize themselves to be. A quote here from an independent social worker, again, from Romania. And they talked about being someone who's accompanied teams. So the idea of a companion, someone who accompanies you. I can say that it's important. It's a safe setting in which you can explore things they might not otherwise. And this, you'll remember, hopefully, my favorite quote from earlier, like unexplored terrain. Again, there's this metaphor of exploring things together, going out. If you're on holiday, let's say, in an unfamiliar place, how much more likely are you to explore a new city if you're with someone, even if they don't know the city, but actually just having someone with you to say, let's try something new together. Let's explore this area that we might not otherwise go into. And so, of course, you end up learning more, seeing more things, feeling more confident than you would if you were on your own. But I'm not telling you where to go, but I'm coming with you where you want to go. And then on the more active side, the controller and the guide, definitely this idea of supervisors as controllers, presented both as a potential misunderstanding of supervision. So if people aren't familiar with what supervision is, do they think it's a mechanism for control? But even if you've got experience, actually that conflict, there is something controlling about supervision. There is a monitoring aspect often in that. You have to account for yourself to someone else. You have to explain your thinking, potentially. That's an accountability function that can be really, really important. So someone from Serbia, a supervisor, saying, I think there's this conflict. On the one hand, supervisors are controllers, but on the other hand, they provide support. So how do you navigate that complexity of that role? And then finally, the guide. So again, I'm going back to a holiday metaphor. What's the difference between a companion and a guide? A companion goes with you. A guide may well advise you on where to go. No, I know this city. I've been here before. These are the places. You want to make the most of your weekend trip to a new city. These are the places you need to go to make the most of this experience. So I'm going to take you to these places. So as someone from Moldova said, a lot of time the worker doesn't see these other solutions, these visions, these perspectives. Supervision helps see that you're not alone. And in my opinion, every person has the need to be guided. So a guide doesn't tell you where to go. If I went on holiday and I employ a guide, they can advise me where to go. I can say, no, I don't want to. I can go somewhere else. They're not controlling me, but they're doing more than a companion. They're suggesting things I should do. So that was a really interesting sort of perspectives. I think hopefully you agree to come out and say, you know, definitely not suggesting at all that any orientation here is the right one or better or worse than others, but actually different workers at different times will need more or less guidance, more or less passive or active positions from their supervisors. So that was you know, an interesting perspective, if you like, to come out of them. Okay. So following a fairly whistle-stop tour through the findings, you know, the report is much longer, more detailed than I've been able to go into this morning. But what kind of recommendations did we collect and develop from our participants? I'm going to try, you know, there are a number of country-specific recommendations that the local researchers will obviously talk more about in relation to each country still to come. So, you know, and you'll have your breakout groups to discuss those for sure as well. So this is kind of a high-level view of the regional recommendations, which I've tried to gather together into some themes that you can see here. Again, starting at the top, it's still just a yellow blob, I'm afraid. Starting at the top left, the yellow blob. Supervision group, you know, should certainly be available for all child protection workers. You know, exactly as we were talking about from the start. Really, you know, it's this kind of work necessitates this kind of support, and where workers are doing, you know, child protection practice without supervision, you know, I would certainly be concerned about the worker, about the service they're able to provide, however good and skilled and well motivated the worker is. You know, how do you sustain that without good support? I'm not too sure. And certainly I have to say, from a UK perspective, the idea that any child protection worker would be doing that kind of work without supervision, you know, just doesn't happen in the UK. But I think you know, but we also have other problems in our supervision, which I'll touch on in a second with the blue blob. But anyway, you know, so certainly you know, child protection workers need supervision. And the work is too important and challenging to do without it. And actually, as a worker, you know, you should be entitled to it. You should have it. You know, even if you don't think you need it, well, you know, I think I would certainly say that you do. I'd be interested if, you know, if people do think they don't need it, then that's certainly a perspective worth thinking about. But certainly, I think you do. And particularly in multidisciplinary teams where you're doing this complicated work, I think, you know, group supervision brings particularly added value in terms of helping people understand different roles, to understand different professional backgrounds, and facilitate better, more coordinated working with families. So, you know, not an optional extra. That was a lot of people talked about that. It's not a luxury. It's not an optional extra. It's a necessary component of any effective child protection system. It's not sufficient. You can't just have supervision and everything else runs smoothly. There are other components of an effective child protection system. Of course there are, but supervision is central. Second, the one in blue, the blue blob. Supervision is not management and should be separate from it. It was a really, really clear view. And I have to say, again, from a UK perspective, coming in, you know, was just completely different to what I think about a supervision in the UK, and was a real learning curve for me in terms of discussions early on. I remember with local researchers about definitions of supervision, you know, how are we defining this? What's this concept? And partly, you know, that's what we were exploring through the supervision, but a very, very clear thread throughout all of the countries that we gather data from, at the risk of running over time slightly. Anyway, you know, but, you know, even in other countries internationally that I've done research on, like Australia, New Zealand, you know, supervision is very, very managerial. Of course, they have similar-ish systems to the UK, Australia, New Zealand. I mean, very different countries as well, but similar-ish legal systems for all sorts of historical colonial reasons. But, you know, one of the main complaints about supervision in those countries and in the UK is how managerial it is, and this capture of supervision by management. And I guess the sense from the regional findings here is that that's quite different. The complaint, if you like, is that there isn't enough of it. Supervisors aren't well supported enough themselves. They're not then able to go out and support workers, but it's not yet, and hopefully won't be, particularly captured by managerial concerns. But of course, then the risk of that. So, you know, how, you know, where managers are providing supervision, some of our respondents were saying that isn't supervision, can't ever be. And so that was a very strong view, you know, whether it's provided externally from the organisation entirely or just separate from line management. But that's what supervision is, and you can't combine the two. And actually, I think there's a real lesson there from the UK. You know, don't try and become, and I'm sure you, why would you anyway, but don't try and become like the UK with management and supervision combined, because it doesn't work. That's the main complaint. Every worker in the UK gets supervision, but do they? Because actually it's their manager giving them supervision. So you could argue that's not really supervision. Anyway, don't combine them. Third, in the purple blob, certainly there were countries regionally with more and less developed policies and procedures in place, as again you'll see as we go through the local sort of researchers reports and so on. Romania, for example, more developed than certainly some of the other countries in terms of their guidance. But actually, even in those countries, everyone was saying, yeah, but even if we've got guidance, we need better guidance. This guidance often wasn't developed in consultation with experts in the system. It didn't have the input of supervisors, didn't have the input of people who would be able to talk to you about what supervision looks like and what it should look like. So it's good that there's guidance, but there should be better guidance, not just having supervision, but what is good quality supervision. So that difference between having something that's unhelpful, actually, how can we kind of guide that and sculpt that through better guidance. And actually, clearly the expertise is out there, because we've found nearly 300 people, more than 300 people, who would be able to write excellent guidance, and if they were given the opportunity to do that. And the other kind of overarching, if you like, theme in the recommendations is this idea that actually supervisors need support as well. That workers need the support of supervisors, because it's a tough job. You go out and you talk to families, and families talk to you about their mental health difficulties, about their substance misuse problems, about their history of trauma and so on. That's really difficult to absorb as a worker. It's just as difficult to absorb that as a supervisor from your supervisees. So supervisors are people too. They need training and education opportunities. They need to have good understanding of theories and models of supervision, and they need a supportive community to have supervision themselves, intra-supervision, peer supervision, whatever we want to call it. But actually, much like you wouldn't leave a counsellor to work on her own without supervision, actually, being a supervisor, very skillful, very difficult job, requires a particular set of expertise and skills and knowledge to do it. And it's hard, and so we have to look after our supervisors if we want our supervisors to look after our workers, and in turn workers to provide a good service for children and families. So those are some of the themes, if you like, from the recommendations. Okay, so wrapping up a bit, hopefully leaving some time for some questions at the end, comments, that sort of thing. So these are my thoughts, really. I don't, other local researchers may look at these and say, I would take a different view. I think that's fine. I'm all for variety and disagreement. So this is definitely me talking, not on behalf of the whole, sort of project. But some final thoughts, I guess, hopefully for things for people to take away. Certainly, if you're a worker, you can ask for supervision. You can advocate for yourself to have supervision. You can ask for the type of supervision you need. If you're not getting it, then I would certainly encourage you. I'm sure people are ready to be vocal about that. You have the right to ask for what you need. You're doing difficult jobs in overworked, under-resourced, social assistance systems. Is there any social assistance system in the world that's not under-resourced? I haven't come across one. It's hard work. There's always more need than you can fully meet. And you're entitled to support, I would say. So you can ask for it, you can agitate for it. Obviously, easy for me to say. Work on developing that good relationship with your supervisor. Tell them about what's helpful and what's not. Think back to the graph, with the purple line always being higher than the yellow line. If you're finding supervision isn't being helpful, supervisors, I would say, are often always going to be open to that. Let's have a discussion about the supervision, what's working, what's not working. There's no point doing something that isn't as helpful as it can be. But also, advocate on behalf of your colleagues, telling your manager, for example, about what difference supervision is making for you, build that narrative that actually supervision is valuable, and the more it happens, the more difference it's going to make. Again, easy for me to say, I'm sure. Managers, I guess, easiest recommendation is, ensure supervision is there for your staff, talk to them about what they need, and one of the things that did come up was this issue of short-term funding, so again, advocating for secure funding, what can we do about that? And actually one of if you like the most sort of depressing things to come out was this. Some people were talking about workers having too much supervision. So because they're involved in several different projects, they're almost getting too much supervision. Other workers getting none. Of course, that's a paradoxical situation if the regional issue is that there's not enough supervision. It doesn't make sense for workers to have too much supervision. It should be shared around more evenly. If you're a supervisor, of course, you'll be doing these things already. I've no doubt about that at all. But interesting to reflect on what supervision is helping with. Do you have different perspectives on how helpful it is, what's working, what's not working? You know, but equally, you're entitled to support for yourself, as the saying goes. I don't know if this is international. We certainly talk about this in the UK. You know, you can't fill up other people's cups when your own cup is empty. You know, if we see the supervisor role as replenishing other people, of course, the more you replenish other people, the less you have resources of your own. You have to take care of yourself in order to take care of other people. Policymakers, you know, we need to establish that legal basis for supervision, but do that in consultation with the experts. You know, there's 300 people in this room, many of whom are experts, or if not all, about supervision. So that guidance has to be good guidance, has to be the right guidance. There are experts in every single country that we looked at, you know, who would be, I'm sure, only too happy to help put that guidance in place, and training and supervision support, sorry, for supervisors. Okay, final sort of bits. I said I had a favorite quote earlier. I slightly lied because I have two favorite quotes. So here's my last one, and I'm going to finish with this. This was from a Moldovan respondent, head of a community service. It's very, very good, I think. So supervision is very important and has a high impact. It's a training method. It ensures good practice. The best thing is the trust and the confidence that the workers get. And this is why I really like it, is that you always get people who are just very poetic in their interviews, far more than I would ever be. Supervisors are like doctors of the soul. I thought that was a nice quote to finish with. So that's where I'm going to finish. Okay. Comments, thoughts, questions? I don't know how we're going to manage those. I know they've been asked through the chat, whether I need to look back through the chat or whether people are going to read them out.
Thank you, David.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I know that it was a hard task for you to put together all this report in a few slides, but really, I think it gave the perspective that we wanted to give through the first presentation, to give you hints in terms of the regional findings and what are the recommendations from different levels. So from the level of the worker, the level of the supervisor, the policymaker, and so on. So now we are a bit delayed, but I would really ask you to put in the chat box to write questions that you have for the regional research. So for what David has presented so far. And just to let you know that we have 308 people in the list of participants. So high interest on the topic. So in the meanwhile that you think about the questions, just to again to repeat the fact that the country reports will continue further. And we'll have as well in the breakout rooms space for you if you have specific questions that can be answered by the country researchers. Please feel free to do it there. But at this moment, please focus on your questions more in the regional research. So, David, can you see in the chat already? I think we have already one first question that I'm sorry for the others that I'm just reading the English one. I see that there are others, but I don't know specifically if they are for David.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would. So I can see a question at the bottom is from Elitsa.
Yes,
sorry
exactly. Yeah.
Pronouncing that incorrectly. Yeah. I apologize. So you know, is the ideal solution to have sort of internal and external supervision arranged in parallel? So I think that's a good question. I think ideal solution, you know, is likely to be ideal for particular teams, you know, or particular workers or particular areas of work. I think there's probably not one type of supervision that's always going to be effective, although as we sort of saw with the word cloud, there's certainly the kind of qualities that you would want in a good supervisor, I think, are pretty much established and, you know, probably do apply across, you know, any kind of working environment, really. But yeah, there was definitely a really strong sense from the key informants that we had in our project, you know, about the value that just having that, you know, whether it's external formally from the organization or whether it's separate from line management within an organization, but there's something about having that different perspective that supervisor can bring that's different from a manager who's, you know, and management, management is not any better or worse than supervision. You know, you need good managers and we need good supervisors. You know, you can't have an effective service without good managers. But I think, you know, very strongly that perspective was there that, you know, management and supervision are not the same thing. And, you know, where they're often combined, and certainly this would be our experience from the UK, management will dominate supervision, you know, quite quickly. And that's bad for supervision. And actually it's bad for management, you know, that you need both of them done effectively. So there's a translated question.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
thanks. Why is Serbia always in the last place in terms of access to supervision? Yeah, I mean, you know, it sounds a bit like a rhetorical question to me, and you know, but perhaps not. I think that, you know, you've got not a complaint, is it, but a kind of, you know, a verbalization of feeling, you know, that you're missing out on something or that it's very difficult. You know, not passing the buck, but there's a Serbian local researcher later on who's going to be talking, and I'm sure if anyone can answer that question, that would be a fair start. Yeah, it's a good one. You know, I guess someone always has to be last. You know, if you've got, you know, whenever you rank things, by definition, someone has to be last, and that's not the place anyone wants to be. But yeah, but equally, they had the most access to supervision. You know, so there was a lot of supervision going on, but workers didn't necessarily rate it as all that helpful. So, you know, in a way, that's a different problem from somewhere like maybe Albania, where there was much less supervision going on, but what was there people felt was helpful. You know, so there's regional similarities, but then there's also going to be those key differences, I guess. You know, is it better to have lots of supervision already and then try and improve it, or to not have much and have to roll it out? I think they both present different challenges, really.
Thank you, David. I don't. Yes, we have another one.
One more.
Yeah. Do you want me to read it, or?
No, that's okay. So yes,
okay.
A question from Sammy. I hope I'm saying that right. A probation officer in Kosovo. Good to see you here this morning. Thanks for joining us. And the question is, do you think that policy making can be a facilitating or aggravating element in the planning of the work we do? From Christina. Thanks for the question from that place. Yeah, I think, like much in, I guess one of the key things in social work, or you know, certainly in associated professions, is hopefully the ability we have to always see two sides of things. So I think we often get these kind of questions, you know, that social work is not linear and child protection work is not linear. It's very complicated and multifaceted. So I think the answer is it's both. You know, it's both and, you know, and there were certainly people in our sample who said there's too much bureaucracy around supervision. I have to write reports, you know, I have to take notes all the time. I have to, you know, make summaries of my sessions. You know, it's a lot of bureaucracy, and the thing that we need to do is cut down on that bureaucracy. And on the other hand, you had people where perhaps there was almost no guidance or no policy, saying what we really need is policy. You know, Kosovo being an example of that. What we really need is more policy, more guidance, more thing. You know, and I suppose it's the double-edged sword, isn't it? That more policy often brings with it more bureaucracy, and that's the sort of part of, that is what policy is in a way, is a form of bureaucratizing what we do. So, you know, but there was definitely a sense that if you get guidance right, if you do it in consultation with people who are experts in the field, if you produce helpful guidance, then there's no reason it shouldn't facilitate good practice. So I think, yeah, it's a both and type of situation, and you know, as with anything, you need good policy like you need good practice. But if you have poor policy and poor practice, you're probably better off with nothing than you are with poor policy, if that makes sense. I can't read that last question. I'm not even sure if you've got time, but I'll let you.
Thank you, David. Unfortunately, I don't think we have time at this session to answer to all the questions. What we'll do after the breakout rooms, we'll be taking more questions. But just as a matter of time management, we have other countries that are ready to present. And please feel free to discuss as well in the country reports presentations and to present the specific questions for the countries. Without further ado, and I do really apologize for the time, but it was really important to go with David through the regional report and its findings. We'll move to the next presentation that will be for Croatia. And in Croatia, we'll have Dr. Ines Rezo Bagarić. I hope I pronounced it well. She has a PhD on social work, and she's working at the University of Zagreb in the Faculty of Law with an interest on research, including mental health, parenthood, and the violence against children. So Ines, can you start the presentation and sharing the screen as well? Thank you.
Here it is. I hope you see it.
Yes, please go ahead. It's fine.
Okay. Sorry. Sorry for a little bit of delay. Okay. Hello to everyone. My name is Ines. I was a local researcher for Croatia. And today I will tell you more about results and recommendations coming from our individual report. Of course, we will discuss it more later in our smaller groups. So I will be really fast, only 10 minutes for this. And I'll try to be more concise that I can be. If you have any question, we will go through in the afternoon session. Okay. So, first of all, I wanted to tell you something about development of supervision in Croatia, because I really liked what I learned in doing this research, and to provide you with some context for supervision in Croatia. So first article and first book on supervision we had in 1970, pretty early, from Professor Nada Smolić-Krković from School for Social Work. So, but unfortunately, supervision did not start then. Then we had, unfortunately, Homeland War in 1990s, and the Society for Psychological Assistance and psychologists and social workers worked with displaced persons and refugees in Croatia. And soon they realized they need supervision for volunteers, for students, for themselves, working with these vulnerable groups. For their luck, they had Jesper Juhl from Denmark, some other UK experts working with families and supervision. So they had opportunity to learn something about it and to start doing and receiving supervision in Croatia. Officially, the first supervision training for supervisors and meta-supervisors was at the beginning of 21st century. It was a cooperation from a Department for Social Work here in Zagreb, and universities of Gothenburg and Stockholm, and financed by a Swedish organization, SIDA. Our Ministry for Social Welfare at that time was also in this project. So they received their first trainings. In 2006, Professor Marina Eduković from Department of Social Work started postgraduate specialist study of supervision, and now they have finished the 5th generation of licensed supervisors. The Society for Supervision and Organizational Development also was started 2 years after, and now it has more than 130 members of this society, who are all licensed supervisors. When we talk about supervision in the child protection system in Croatia, its development has also started in the last 15 years. In the last few years, a model of method supervision in protection of children's welfare has been developed, especially related to the social welfare system, again from scientists and researchers from a Department of Social Work. This model is aimed to ensure the sustainability of the new approach of working in child protection system by strengthening the competences of our workers and providing support to professionals working in the field of child protection within social welfare. So that is a little bit of our context, and I'll go straight to research result because of the time. For the beginning, I put the quote from our key interview participant, who says something about child protection work in Croatia, and I would say in general. It is a very demanding and exhausting job on several levels, where there is no chance that everyone involved will be satisfied. Supervision is essential to ensure continuous quality care for children, as our participant sees it. Just shortly about our participants, they were mostly females, as they are in this area of work in Croatia, coming from social work, some of them from education and NGO sector, and the least of them from health, science, or other work areas. So what did they tell us? First, supervision is a key part of the child protection work. I really like this title. It's actually connected with our participants saying that in the last 20 years, awareness has been raised about the importance and about the need for expert supervision, but supervision is still underrepresented in the child protection system, especially maybe they say in education and healthcare system, but also in NGO and social welfare parts of the child protection. Usually supervision takes place monthly in group work, and they have different types of supervision like method, integrative developmental, or team supervision. Unfortunately, supervision is usually funded by short projects by NGOs, and does not have any, mostly doesn't have any governmental support. When we did analysis documents in as part of this research, there was a great discrepancy or a great gap between non-existent government documents about supervision, and on one hand, and on the other hand, very rich literature coming from researchers and professionals from this field in Croatia, meaning that when you go into our base of research and professional papers, we call it Hrčak, then you can find more than 100 papers, more than 40 theses from specialist studies regarding all kinds of topics about supervision and supervision in Croatia. On the other hand, no legal documents covered supervision in details. Some of them mentioned it in different contexts, but this gap is something that we will probably discuss later in our groups. The main outcome of the supervision of child protection experts is a better quality of work with their clients, which is achieved through a series of helpful supervision practices that our participants said they really like and they think that are helpful in their supervision work. They say supervision encourages humanistic principles in work regarding the strengths and potentials that every individual has for development and change. The importance of specific ways of working, such as providing different perspectives, specific guidelines, especially for working and establishing a cooperative relationship with children and with families, our participants found very useful. Using specific exercises to better understand our clients and focus on motivation of our clients to change, and again reflecting, analyzing, thinking about different levels of professional responsibility. Those are all helpful supervision practices. For example, we can see it in this quote of one of our participants that says exactly this that I just talked about. Extra, it says it also prevents burnout and helplessness in our experts, which is connected with other helpful supervision practices like help in emotional regulation of experts, emotional unburdening, especially connected with working with our traumatized clients, and of course reducing feelings of loneliness when in this work, which can be very lonely. It is important that supervision tackles topics on self-care and different ways of coping with work stress, and in general, as I said, it can help to prevent burnout and to protect mental health of our experts. Easily, we can transfer that how it is connected with our children and our families that we work with, because as in words of one of our participant from a survey, emotional well-being is transmitted in relation to the client. If we are emotionally well, then we can more easily help our children, our families in our everyday work. Of course, we talked about main challenges in supervision and child protection in Croatia. And the main challenges is lack of awareness in decision makers about the importance of supervision in preventing negative outcomes for children. And of course, supervision is a source of professional support and help in working with children and families. Because of this lack of awareness, or because, of course, different other reasons, our participants see that they lack of available and continuous funding for supervision. That means that they expect to have reliable sources of funding so they can have regular, continuous supervision when they need it. But unfortunately, that is not the case in Croatia currently. Also, our participants talk about EU funds, project proposal specifications, which do not meet the guidelines for supervision. For examples, they say it can only be 4 to 6 supervision meetings, which is very short for our experts, and they see that it's not enough to provide enough support and guidance in working with complex cases. Also, they sometimes say they should have like more than 20 persons in supervision group. Those are not good guidelines for supervision. Also, they say the challenge is lack of awareness of the importance of supervision among some experts working in this field and executives who make decisions about supervision in organization. And there is a lack of licensed supervisors who can provide supervision in child protection system. As you can see from our quotes of our participants, they are very strong in asking and thinking and reflecting that supervision should be an integral part of work, and they should be able to have equal availability of supervision and continuity in that work. Regarding supervision efficacy, our participants said that they see supervision as useful and effective, and we did not have differences between supervisors and supervisees in these answers. They both see it as very effective, especially in preventing negative outcomes in children and families. They see it as effective in establishing better relationships, better communication with children and families, but also in giving new knowledge and skills for experts. Those new knowledges, skills, support actually increases the clarity and the structure of the work for experts, then it increases work confidence and work motivation for our experts. And all in all, it gives us better work quality in child protection system. For example, one of our participants, supervisees, said that supervision is a great help to her or him, I'm not sure, because experts from different centers are there, they exchange experience, they provide support, they get new ideas for their cases when they hit the wall, as they sometimes see it in working with complex cases with children and families. In the end, recommendations would be, first of all, ensuring continuous and regular supervision meetings financed from the state budget. Why? Because supervision, as our participant sees it, is a key service for maintaining and improving the quality of work with clients in this field. And as such, it should be financed from the state budget. Then everyone who needs supervision can supervision, and this increases the possibility of preventing negative outcomes for children and families, for empowering experts in this field, and in the end, to developing a better child protection system. Second recommendation would be additional work on recognizing the importance of supervision, which should be a joint work of our ministries and our professional organizations who are doing supervision. As a third recommendation, it goes beyond this research, third and fourth recommendation, but we saw it as very important. Third one was establishing a model for the development of professionals working in the child protection system, meaning that all of us who would work in child protection as a beginner would have additional education on modern work in child protection, and then method supervision in maybe first few years of the work. Then experienced practitioners should have opportunity to have integrative development supervision and to further develop their skills in working with children and families. As the last recommendation, encouraging professional dialogue and cooperation between experts and decision makers. We see it as important thing, except giving supervision and paying, of course, for supervision of experts. Our decision makers should provide better working conditions in child protection system, more education for our workers, more developing teamwork in our organizations, and positive media promotion of the work of child protection experts. These all are recommendations coming from this research, but also coming again from the rich literature we have in Croatia, especially the work from, for example, Professor Marina Ajduković, Professor Branka Sladović-Franc from Department of Social Work, and their latest work with UNICEF on providing supervision, but those are parts really connected with child welfare system. There are also other areas of child protection that really need our interest and more work giving the best result for our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Ines, for making it really on time. And I would ask as well to the other colleagues to focus on the findings, at least to follow the same example, the findings and recommendations as well. So let's move to the other country, and the other country, it is Romania. And in Romania, we have two researchers actually named Irinas, both. So Irina Opincaru is a sociologist. Currently, she is a PhD student at the Doctoral School of Sociology at the University of Bucharest in Romania. And she's working with Concordia, an organization working in humanitarian aid. Irina Adascalitei is a
Adascalitei, yes, it's a long and complicated name.
Oh, sorry.
No worries.
So she's a psychologist specialized in organizational psychology and a psychotherapist in trauma and a coach, and with more than 18 years of experience in organizational development. And she's as well the founder and director of Concordia Academia, a regional center of excellence offering trainings, programs, and support services to professionals in the field of social services. So I will hand it over to Irina to continue with the findings and recommendations specifically to Romania. Please.
Hi, you all. Thank you for this invitation, and thank you for the opportunity of being part of this very successful project. If you ask me, I'm personally strongly convinced by the importance of the supervision, and I highly appreciate any kind of context which would allow sharing the models, best practices, different kind of opinion and approaches. So this is really a very valuable context of learning for all of us here. Please let me check with you if you see my screen.
Yes, please go ahead. Yes, we see it.
Yes. Now.
Yes, Irina.
Yeah, good. So this presentation is based on national report on supervision, which was conducted in Romania.
Irina, I'm sorry, if you just can go on presentation mode.
Yes.
Now, yes. Yes.
Okay, good. It was a mistake. I'm sorry for this. I would like to shortly present Concordia Humanitarian Organization, because both Irina Opincaru, my colleague, and myself, both of us, we represent Concordia social projects. Concordia Humanitarian Organization is the Romanian part of Concordia social project, which is an international provider of social services for different kind of vulnerable groups in Romania, Republic of Moldova, Bulgaria, Kosovo, and Austria. and Concordia Academia, part of Concordia social projects, still part of Concordia social projects, because starting with 2023, we are going to have a legal body on our own. So Concordia Academia was established 2015 and is actually regional provider of training programs and support services in order to capacitate the professionals in social services, in social field and social medical field. This research involves more than 65 professionals in supervision. I will shortly point out the reason why Concordia Academia was a part of the project, because Irina Opincaru, my good and close colleague, she's a researcher, but the reason Concordia Academia was a part of the entire story. 5 years ago, Concordia Academia initiated and was actively involved in the process of the development of occupational standards in supervision in Romania. And this gives me the opportunity to move to the second slide, which actually points out how we are standing in Romania from the supervision perspective. What do we know at the moment? Supervision is regulated as occupation according to occupational standard for supervisor in social services, which was approved in 2017. So actually there were 2 years of focused work in order to increase awareness and in order to officially recognize the occupation of supervisor at national level. Behind it all was research done back then by Concordia Academia, and I will very shortly take the opportunity to answer to one of the ideas which appeared in chat a little bit earlier about internal and external supervision, which could be arranged in parallel in the same time. And I must tell you, based on our experience, that internal supervision doesn't work. And the best version to offer supervision to professionals involved in social services is to use external supervisors. If needed, I can answer this question in a more specific way later on. So I will stick to my presentation now. At the moment in Romania, supervision is a mandatory activity which is included in different kind of minimum quality standards in working with children and other vulnerable categories. So by all means, all social welfare institutions are expected to establish whether supervision is being provided for the staff, how, when, and the frame. The current applicable legislation underlines the importance of supervision for the qualitative, ethical, and impactful social work, but doesn't bring supervision on the page as being absolutely mandatory. So the legislation is still a little bit unspecific from this point of view, and I will immediately come back to this. From the supervisor point of view, considering supervision as a process requested by the quality standard in social work, the supervisor must have long-term studies in one of the fields, psychology, social work, or sociology, as well as additional preparation in supervision. So she must prove the fact that beside the university, the degree and a master diploma, must present the proof of additional preparation in supervision. According to occupational standard in Romania, and also according to the legislation which officially certifies supervision in Romania, the training program in supervision should last around 1 year and should imply in the same time theoretical preparation and a lot of practice. There is also a precondition for the supervisor to prove 5 years of work experience in the field of social services. Who is the supervisor? This presentation is going to put at the disposal of everyone present here. So I will not insist on pointing out those conditions already mentioned, but I will focus more on the challenges brought by the situation, by the status quo of supervision as just presented. First of all, one of the main conclusions out of our research was based on lack of conceptual delimitations I'm sorry for this, between professional and functional supervision. Our participants in the study clearly pointed out a certain differentiation which currently exists without being named as such in current legislation, a certain differentiation which exists between professional supervision and functional one. The professional supervision referring more to professional development, frame of conducting professional behavior, quality standards and competencies in social work, in comparison with a functional supervision, which is more seen as a process put at the disposal of practitioners in social work in order for them to be able to deal with the emotional workload, with the emotional load of their work. I would like here now to link this conceptual delimitation also to the fact that professional supervision is more related to the manager and to the way he supervises the competencies and the level of quality of his staff's work. On the other hand, is highly underlined the fact that supervision should not be delivered, should not be provided by the manager, considering the fact that there is a clear differentiation between the supervision as a function of the manager and professional supervision, which should consist more in supporting, guiding, and containing social workers from an emotional point of view. Also, another very important point to be mentioned is related to the fact that whether even if our respondents clearly pointed out 2 ways of supervision, it is not by far the intention to find different names to explain the supervision, but to follow a more broader perspective in which supervision in the same time should cover the professional side of the story, the professional competencies, the professional frame of a desirable behavior coming from the professional, but in the same time to cover the part of emotional emotional balance when it comes to social work and the context the social workers are actually working in. I will also bring here in front of you the concept of self-care, And I will also link this with something which was specified just before by David. In East European countries, the culture of self-care almost doesn't exist. We are not used with reflection. We are not educated by children. We are not educated to put the focus on what we feel, how we feel, and how our work does affect us. I think that the lack of self-care, also the lack of self-care culture, the lack of self-care practice in East European countries, and I will take the liberty to mention here not only Romania but also Moldova, and I hope, Olivia, you do agree with me. The culture of self-care really doesn't exist, and is our role to increase awareness and to explain how important it is for the professionals to be aware, to take time to reflect more, and to understand not only the reasons they have chosen to do this work, but in the same time how in which way and up to which level they are really affected by the work they do every day, and by the vulnerability about the inadequate conditions their beneficiaries, they are responsible for, are living day by day. Professional supervision is required for social workers. This is a very important idea because, for instance, professional supervision is really strongly supported and highly recommended, for instance, by the National College of Social Workers. Professional supervision is encouraged, is highly recommended. Only that we should keep in our mind the fact that social work is conducted by different diverse professional categories, not only by social workers. So accepting social assistants or social workers who by default have access to professional supervision, let's consider also psychologists, educators, counselors, mediators, or perhaps even teachers and other professional categories working with different kind of beneficiaries as part of social work, as part of social services provided for vulnerable people, for vulnerable groups, because they all should access supervision in targeting increased quality of their work, but in the same time building a self-care culture and taking care of themselves. I will hurry up a little bit, and I will point out, I will point out the main conclusions. Very shortly, I will tell you about foresight type of project conducted by Concordia Academia, which is almost over, but at European level, pointing out the main key competencies of the future work in social field in the perspective of next decade. So we really talk here about 2030. Self-care is named as being one of the most important future competence. So accessing supervision with openness determines an articulated process of self-development. And again, I'm pointing out here self-care as future skill, as just explained. Finding a common understanding over the supervision process, I think, is key, crucial not to split the understandings in between professional supervision, functional supervision, individual supervision, group supervision, supervision which is internally conducted or externally conducted. I think it's is mandatory to find a common understanding, and for supervision to be legally explained, clarified, and requested in social work, social educational work, social medical work, social services, in order to assure professional but also personal development of the staff. Also, proper and clear legislative regulations, targeted advocacy work for raising awareness, and for sustainable systems of financing at national level, because individuals and also organizations, public or private organizations in social work, very difficult with high difficulties access financial resources in order to create supervision spaces and to facilitate access for professionals to supervision. Very often supervision is saw only as a formal process which can be skipped or overlooked. Again, this is a context where I underline the importance of raising awareness, and I think you all agree with me. Otherwise, everything which David already said in terms of main conclusions as clear standards needed in legislation, group supervision, individual and group supervision, which should be available for all the members, all the professionals part of multidisciplinary teams, because we work based on integrative approach, a systemic approach. The case management and the multidisciplinary approach is mandatory. The entire staff should access in one way or another supervision. Training and education for supervisors, this was also very well pointed out by David and his main conclusions out of the regional report. And again, as one of the key ideas, supervision should be in a very well way distinguished in comparison with management and its functions. I will finish my presentation, of course, pointing out the very difficult situation we are all confronted with. The Republic of Moldova and Romania are very much hands-on, supporting the refugees groups coming from Ukraine. Refugees running away from war made us act together and respond with solidarity and empathy. Professionals remained active day and night, learning by doing how to deal with a different kind of pain and different kind of trauma. Professionals do need support and guidance in order to be really helpful. Supervision is one of the key in the moment, and trying to open up a little bit and to grow the culture of self-care is really mandatory now. The professionals are very involved in providing support without paying attention to what is going on with themselves. Thank you so much. I hope I finished just in time. I hope. If not, please accept my apologies. I'm waiting for your questions in chat. Otherwise, we will definitely have time to work in our small groups after the break.
Thank you, Irina. Thank you very much for your presentation and putting emphasis, especially in the self-care part, and as well the need for supervision in these moments that especially Romania, Moldova, it is going through, and the professionals there. I will kindly ask you to put your questions in the chat, and will not have time to answer now, but still will be taking them over. Will not forget them for sure.
I will write them all down, and I will try my best to answer back in the chat, if not later on.
Great, thank you, Irina.
Thank you.
For the flexibility as well. So let's move to the other country in our list. It is Kosovo. So for Kosovo, we'll have Jenny Shehai. She will be presenting the report for Kosovo. And Jenny, she has a PhD. She's graduated from the London Schools of Economics. And as well, she has a lot of research experience in different fields, exploring young women's experience with social security and employment and so on. And she joined the team of the researchers specifically for Kosovo. So Jenny, can you continue, please?
Yes, thank you, Alketa. Now I will share my screen.
Thank you. We can see Jenny, but please just go on presentation mode.
Please reshare it again.
Is this okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So hi everyone. I will not present myself as Alketa did it. I'm Jenny, and I'm going to present the findings from the research we have been conducting on supervision of child protection workers in Kosovo. So I just made this table of contents so you know what to expect from the presentation. I will talk shortly about an overview of the supervision in Kosovo at the moment. Then I will go on to talk about the experiences and perceptions of child protection professionals. Then I will talk a little bit about the challenges and also the main themes that came up from the interviews that we conducted with different stakeholders in the field. I will also talk about the best practices, as there are some very good examples of supervision in Kosovo. And then I will talk about the recommendations that we have come up with. To start with, the social service provision in Kosovo transferred to the municipalities responsible for managing centers for social work in 2009. This was due to the decentralization process that started in Kosovo with the state building in 2008, and it underpinned almost every policy decision that was made. So the idea was to transfer the power to the centers for social work and the municipalities at the local level in order to better manage the provision of the social services. According to the law, the responsibilities were transferred to the centers. However, the responsibilities for monitoring and supervising remained within the Ministry for Social Work and Labor at the time, which is now not anymore responsible for this and is replaced by the Ministry for Finance and Transfers. The Centers for Social Work directors are the people who are currently carrying out monitoring and supervision duties without a clear definition of their role in the legislation. However, in practice, they are the ones who are providing, let's say, monitoring duties to the social workers in the centers. As I previously mentioned, there was no legal reference to supervision actually until March of 2022, which was not even a month ago. On the 1st of March, there was an updated law on the law for families and social services in Kosovo, which actually mentions supervision for the first time as vocational training and mentoring. Also, the law mentions professional supervision as a right of the social services officer, but does not specify further dynamics, for example, as to state what the main roles are. However, they say that professional supervision should be conducted by trained professionals that will be licensed by the Council for Social Work in Kosovo, which was established a couple of years ago. At the moment, professional supervision in the recent years has been provided sporadically by donor projects from civil society organizations. I say sporadically because it is not yet a sustainable system. However, there have been many projects to train supervisors and also to help students of social work and other professionals in the field receive training and supervision. However, as one of our interviews mentioned, supervision happens at the local level, and the local level in Kosovo does not yet have a concrete procedure to follow for supervision and no structure as a result. And this is a point that needs to be strengthened. As you can see, the picture that I have added on the slide with the puzzle is because I see from the research, I think that the supervision is a kind of a puzzle, and the different stakeholders that are involved within it should cooperate in order to see the full picture. So why supervision of child protection workers important in Kosovo? First of all, the child protection law is very new. And as I mentioned, the law for families and social services was just updated recently. So these updated versions create more issues and confusion actually for social workers because they are being updated regularly. So they add pressure, and sometimes it makes the service delivery for children less effective as a result. One of the social workers we interviewed said, and I quote, "The laws are either underway, new, or under review almost all the time. I am constantly under the pressure of not being aware of a new law which can change my course of action and can cause a child to get confused and do more damage than good." So as I said, the laws that are new or under review sometimes cause more confusion, and this poses the need to have a supervisor in order to have more clarity and support in which course of action to follow in terms of the legislation. Secondly, as most of you might know, Kosovo has one of the youngest populations in Europe. And in terms of children, 31% of Kosovo's population is 0 to 18 years old. And from these, 23% of Kosovo's children live in poverty and 7% live in extreme poverty. These statistics show nothing more than the fact that there are many issues that children are faced with every day, and there is immediate need to address these issues. And what this means is that there are more cases every day that the Centers for Social Work have to deal with. And actually, as one of the social workers we interviewed confirmed, and I quote, "The center has a huge number of cases coming in every day, and there is only one head of the Center for Social Work to consult for the legal framework and other issues. Sometimes we need to reopen cases, and if the same supervisor is not there anymore, the process of reviewing takes longer and the child is affected by this." Also, this was a main theme in all conversations that we had with the social workers, especially in the Centers for Social Work. They mentioned the huge load of the cases that comes in every day. And they also mentioned that usually this affects the children a lot because they get confused when the social worker is changed or when the supervisor is changed. And the same way from the lack of a supervisor. So this two main points show the immediate need of supervision of child protection workers in Kosovo. Now, I am going to go on to talk about the different perspectives and that social workers in child protection involved in Kosovo have communicated to us during the interviews. I have included here 4 different quotes from 4 different actors involved in child protection. So it's from the side, from the perspective of a social worker, from the perspective of a supervisor, from the perspective of the University of Pristina professor from the Department of Social Work, which is very important because it creates a future generation of social workers, and also from the perspective of a psychologist. To start with the social worker, the main theme that came in most of the interviews with social workers was that the cases when they received supervision, it made them feel safe and confident. I have also highlighted the keywords that they have mentioned. So as the social worker mentioned, she said, I'm a social worker and not a lawyer, so I have to be careful not to make any legal mistakes while carrying out my job. Having someone who has provided me with legal advice at all times has made me feel safe and confident to continue with my job. So this shows that supervision, when it happens, is very effective, and the specific quote was from someone who had been receiving supervision, actually double supervision, for a year in one of the centers for social work that had the most load of cases, and she mentioned that it was very effective for her, and it had actually been effective also for the children that she was for the cases that she was managing. Next, we interviewed officials from the University of Pristina, from the Department of Social Work, and something that I really liked that was mentioned was that supervision, as it was coded, is in a way a practical knowledge transfer tool, and complements what a newly graduated social worker might not know in terms of practical knowledge. So it holds key importance. This is self-explanatory, so I will not go further into the reflection. However, I really, this was very insightful, as the department, as I said, is the place where the social workers are born, let's say, in a way. So this is very important to mention. Then we have the view from the supervisors. The supervisors that we interviewed mentioned that they saw that the positive effect that their professional supervision had on the social workers. And one of them mentioned how the supervisees learned how to be more comfortable and not overloaded emotionally and professionally in managing cases, especially the high-risk ones. They mentioned that the cases are very overloaded emotionally and can cause great distress on the worker, which can affect their ability to deal with the case in the best way possible. And as a result, it can affect the children as well. This was also previously mentioned by Irina. It's the notion of self-care that is usually dismissed and not really talked about, but it's actually one of the most important issues that needs to be addressed by supervision. And last but not least, the perspective from the psychologist. The psychologist mentioned that supervision had helped him deal with heightened emotions and with things such as cognitive dissonance that had often experienced while managing cases, especially the complex ones. This was a theme that was noted not only with psychologists, but also throughout the conversations with other social workers as well. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenges that the implementation of supervision is currently facing in Kosovo. The first one, as I have been also stressing until now, is the lack of the legislative regulation of supervision. Despite the recent law that was updated now that I mentioned before, there was no regulation of supervision before in the laws, and the recent one is fairly new to talk about the regulation, so this still remains as a challenge. Also, secondly, another challenge that came up was the lack of governmental funding for supervision as a profession. This came up more in the form of a lack of financial planning at the center, and then the devolution of this planning to the municipalities. From the first two challenges, then came the third one, which is the lack of sustainability and infrastructure in supervision. And then it's the lack of trained supervisors. As I will mention from the best practices, there are supervisors being trained at the moment by cooperation between the ministry, the University of Pristina, and the civil society organizations. However, the work has started in recent years, so there is still a lack of trained supervisors in the field. Another challenge is the risk of getting stuck in a vicious circle of one-time donor-funded projects. As I mentioned, the current situation, the current supervision that is being implemented has been through donor-funded projects, through civil society organizations more. So the risk of the supervision just remaining in that one-time implemented projects is still there. And last but not least, the weak interinstitutional cohesion was also mentioned by officials and also by supervisors. I will read out a quote from one of the officials we interviewed, who said that having a sustainable system is necessary to avoid getting stuck with one-time projects that only repeat how supervision can be executed, but do not build an actual infrastructure. And then from the challenges, I will mention some of the best practices, which during the research, I found out there actually are a lot of, there has been a lot of work being conducted in Kosovo, considering the fact that the legislation is new and the country is very young. There has been quite a lot of good work regarding supervision. The first one is the design of the multidisciplinary tables for case management, which came as a result of the work by Terdezom in cooperation with the Ministry of Labor and Social Work. This is now a bylaw, the multidisciplinary tables for case management, and it was created during many meetings and working groups from all the stakeholders involved in social work. And this is very important because it brings a very new approach to social work and a very good practice for supervision. The second one was the development of a training module for supervision by Terdezom in Kosovo. The training module is very important, and it was developed last year because it was used in the initiatives that I will mention later on to train the supervisors. As I mentioned, there is a lack of trained supervisors, and this module set the basis for training people and giving them the necessary skills. This links to what I just said, the initiative of the Ministry and the University of Pristina for the engagement of social work students and as interns in the Centers for Social Work, the residential centers for elderly and disability in Kosovo, as well as in NGOs. And this was also licensed by the Ministry. This initiative brought together probably for the first time stakeholders from the ministry, from the public institutions, from the private, from the university, and also from the civil society. And this was the initiative also where the training of 30 professionals engaged as supervisors happened, and also for the first time students from the social work department, which was created in 2012 in cooperation with ChildHub in Kosovo, started being trained as interns in the Centers for Social Work. This is the main recommendations that have come up from the research. The first one is that there should be a legislative framework for supervision in Kosovo, which defines supervision as a profession with clear roles and responsibilities. This will be very important in order to not create any more confusion between the social workers as to who they should ask for help and support, and also it will take the burden off the head of the Centers for Social Work, who are now acting also as supervisors. Secondly, there should be better financial planning at the center regarding supervision. By the center, I mean from the government. There should be better financial planning. There should be specific funds allocated to supervision as a training process and to supervisors in the form of a fixed financial compensation. This will foster the basis for sustainability in supervision provision. This was something suggested by all of the stakeholders we interviewed as well, because the financial compensation will help create a system and a basis for supervisors and also an incentive for them to carry out the job. It is the third recommendation is that it is desirable for social work officials to be graduates of the social work department. This would help draw clear lines and create a more sustainable provision system, considering that supervision is a module recently taught at the social work bachelor's and master's program. As I mentioned, the Department for Social Work at the University of Pristina is quite new. It was created in 2012. However, there have been modules created at the university and also introduced on supervision specifically. So this would help set the basis for a more sustainable system where supervisors would have a point of referral, let's say, to the university. Then a package of tools and training for supervision of social work should be clearly defined and provided by centers of social work and civil society organizations who are involved in the process. A package of tools and trainings for supervision is important because, as I saw in one of the comments, I think it was from Shundresa, she asked the question of what is good supervision and how it is supposed to be conducted. This is not clear yet, and the package of tools and training for supervision I think it would help clear out what the roles are and what a good supervisor is. And last but not least, there should be more research on supervision of child protection workers in Kosovo, because at the moment research is a bit scarce. However, the civil society organizations are I think in progress of producing many reports in this regard. So this is all for Kosovo. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jenny.
And okay.
Yeah.
Just I would say any questions, I can answer them in the chat box since maybe we are a bit late.
Yes, we are quite late actually, but thank you, Jenny. We'll do our best to manage this. So the suggestion is this: we go for a short break for 10 minutes. I'm sorry, but I don't think we'll manage considering the time. So please come back here at 11:55. And we'll start immediately with the presentation of Albania, and afterwards we'll move with the other presentations. I have a very kind request for the other researchers presenting. Please try to focus only on the findings and recommendations for the countries. That like this will give time as well to the breakout rooms. I know it is hard, but it is as well challenging for everybody to have 7 countries in the same place. So you can mute your mic, you can mute your mics and stay here, but please just take the break. Thank you, Jenny. Tamas, shall we start?
I think so, Alketa. Yeah, time is a narrow asset now.
Thank you. Izela, is she connected? We have Albania in the list. Okay, so, okay, she's on mute, she's saying, and she cannot share the screen. Anyway, so Tamas, if you can help Izela with that, and in the meanwhile,
Yes, I'm fine now.
Okay, thank you, Izela. Welcome back to everyone. Hope you managed to have a short, very short break, but we'll start now with the country, like the remaining countries today in this second session. So we have Albania, and for Albania, we'll be presenting Dr. Izela Tassini. Izela is a professor at the Faculty of Social Work in Albania. She has been having an extensive experience in child protection and capacity building programs. In the meanwhile, she's as well a psychotherapist and working for more than 20 years now in this field. Izela will be presenting the findings and recommendations for Albania. The same request Izela as for the other researchers, please focus on that. And without further ado, please, the word to you.
Thank you, Alketa. Hello, everyone. It's very nice to be here. I also wanted to greet very shortly my colleagues at the Faculty of Social Sciences. I suppose, and I hope I am connected to them too, because there is a very important activity in the month of the social work, and it's also a collaboration with Third Zone in this regard. I will continue with my presentation. Just to the screen. I chose to name it the patchy landscape of supervision in Albania, also to give you a metaphor for a snapshot of supervision. I found it the right word because as you'll see, the situation of supervision in Albania is very uneven, and as there are pieces of land, if we would say, who are really untouched, there are also some looming good practices that we'll see. So with that in mind, we will continue with the rest of it. I wanted to start with a few little stories to give you a better idea of what's going on. And of course, for everyone who's interested, the full results and the full study will be online very soon. We have a situation that the term supervision is not mentioned, almost not mentioned in any legal document in child protection, except for school services. And even then, it's a very short document who doesn't go into any necessary detail. So there is this conversation within public services. When you talk about supervision, sometimes you'll get the answer, what are you talking about? On the other hand, we have a full online course on supervision in Albania that provides a certificate that's internationally known by CELSIS with a well-known center, and we have interested professionals who already got the certificate of the course. We have A here, who is a child protection worker, as many are. But for example, in a municipality of 13,000 children and 4 administrative units, and according to the law, there should be 4 child protection workers in this municipality, including 1 child protection unit head or manager. But actually, she's the only worker there. She manages all cases by herself and never had supervision. In very complex cases, she got phone technical assistance by the agency for the rights and protection of children. And technical assistant is a term used for helping with the complex cases and emergency cases, who, if we were to go to the definition of supervision, those known internationally, would be a kind of informal supervision who is used only in crisis situation, but doesn't go beyond that. On the other hand, we have M, who is another worker, but has been getting supervision regularly for the last 2 years on monthly group sessions organized by ChildHub on a voluntary basis. She finds it very helpful and will continue to be part of the group as the process is still going on. So this is for a patchy landscape. And to go on with the snapshot, as I mentioned, one of the main challenges is the fact that the term supervision, you cannot find it in the most important documents. There is monitoring mentioned, as other colleagues mentioned before, who would cover the administrative function of supervision, but also emergency support in case management. We have the citation there of manager of child protection unit that says, is it monitoring? Is it supervision? We are stuck here. And you can understand that this would bring a confusion over the definition and purpose of supervision that is clearly shown by our research. There are a few heads of units that offer support, but they lack protocols and methodologies in doing so. And there is the agency who offers technical assistance, but to have a fuller picture of that, this is the staff of 6 persons who is supposed to cover cases from municipalities all over Albania. So you can, we have to say that they are really lacking human resources in this regard. Also, both heads of units and heads of psychosocial educational units in schools are involved in other roles. For example, heads of units are doing part-time supervision, and part-time they are social workers or psychologists working in 2 to 3 schools or kindergarten. And that is the least to say challenging. So if we were to summarize the situation in public services, components of supervision are being offered informally and not in an intentional and planned way. While on the other hand, there are NGOs who have provided, especially in the last 10 years, several planned and intentional supervisory experience, but those are not driven by the professional needs or the municipalities' needs, but they are donor-driven and as such lack sustainability. This has produced 2 different views on supervision who are shown in our research. On one hand, it's partially unknown and its importance is diminished in the public sector, apart from those professionals and groups that have been exposed to it through experiences provided by the NGO sector. And for the last one, supervision is a crucial component, with the main aim of ensuring quality case management within a culture of trust that they emphasize, and also offering emotional support for the staff. We have a manager that says state structures do not understand this importance while the need is emergent and screaming. And we have also a child protection unit head that says some workers are new, they sometimes get stuck. This is amplified by lack of human and financial resources. The empowerment of professionals reduces some of this limitation and increases quality of services. There have been those experiences of supervision that I mentioned before, and actually they are reported as very helpful. As you saw from the regional presentations, we were one of the countries that are very satisfied with the experiences that we have, although there are not many of them. But this is not to say that it remains in the frame of when you have little and you don't know better, you are satisfied with what we get, because we can see then from more detailed ratings that there is a critical view of the experiences that they had. But even so, overall, they are helpful. There are some modest difference of ratings that show supervisors are more positive than supervisees, as it happened in other countries. And rapport actually is rated more positively by supervisees than supervisors. And this is interesting, but the client focus is rated higher by supervisors. Of course, further research would be needed in this regard to go in more in depth in these needs and how they can be translated in better experiences. Also, they emphasize the extra benefits that they get by group supervision, learning from the whole group and amplifying expertise in this kind of setting. There are some citations there that are interesting. and there have been many of them. One manager says after they get used to our discussions, the staff, it means they feel comfortable, so they learn to do their work better, and it is reflected in a better quality of case management. Also, the interviewing skills of all staff have quite improved. And the psychologist in a school says, because of supervision, I feel more secure and clear about all the cases that I have discussed in my sessions. Going from challenges and limitations, on a more positive note, there have been good practices, which are these blooming parts of the landscape. For example, there are a few CPU managers in those municipalities who are structurally more developed, that they have continued to progress in their guiding role towards the staff, and also trying to develop some methodologies in relation to monitoring. There is a module internationally recognized who is available. There are several NGOs that have been offering supervision over the years, and some of these experiences have been also long-term. And there are the respondents who report very helpful experiences of supervision. Having said that, which is really a snapshot of a snapshot, I would go to the recommendations. It was interesting because being the fourth or fifth in line, you see that how we come together to similar recommendations. This is a summary of them, and of course they are more developed in the research document, and we can also discuss about them in our breakout rooms. It's a very interesting and important part of it. But the four main ones are, there is a strong need, of course, for developing the necessary documentation, legal framework on supervision with clear roles and responsibilities for both supervisors and supervisees, and how it is evaluated and documented too. There is also a need to implement the existing laws on child rights and protection and on social services with regard to the development of the social services structure and municipalities. Child protection units, needs assessment and referral units, which means hiring enough staff and hiring the properly trained staff, always according to the law, which then can be more prepared to do case management, but also can be more prepared to be supervisors, internal supervisors of child protection workers. One of the difficulties referred by the respondents was the fact that sometimes your head of unit or head of service is someone who doesn't have a degree in social work. And in that case, how can that person be your supervisor? There is a need beyond that to organize the supervisory component in child protection through structuring a cooperation between the public structures, the ministry is important in this regard, the agency, and the NGOs who have been the most strong in this field in offering supervision, maximizing all the available resources so far. And last but not least, there is a need to ensure proper training or supervisions by developing criteria about academic and professional training and work experience of supervisors, and designing a formal training on supervision based on the current good practices of NGOs. I think for Albania, our the most important product of this research would be using it as an advocacy tool to promote supervision in child protection services. And let's hope that by that we go to a more even landscape of supervision in our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Isela, for making the snapshot of the snapshot really on time. Well, Albania is bringing a different somehow perspective in the research, as you have been focusing as well in the child protections, like units in the country, but as well in the psychosocial units within the school. So really having this multidisciplinary approach And the same, like we can see, and I assume the participants, how the different puzzles of supervision are coming together from different countries. And this was actually one of the aims of today's conference, to really share with everyone interested in these different puzzles. So thank you, Isela, for the time. Please feel free to write your questions for Albania in the chat box, and will be answered probably in the chat box. And without further ado, I would like to move to Moldova. Do we have Olivia connected?
Yes, I am.
Yes, great. So now we'll have Miss Olivia. She will be presenting the research for Moldova. Olivia is a professional with over 20 years of experience, mostly working with international and local NGOs in different programs in access to justice, juvenile justice, media law, and civil society. She had an interest on the field of child protection and joined the team of the researchers for Moldova. So Olivia, the floor is with you.
Thank you for the presentation, Alketa. I'll try to share now the screen and
yes, we can see your screen, but just please in the presentation mode, so if you can put it so everybody can see it.
I'm not sure.
Olivia, just click on the right left corner. You have this presentation button, because we still see the editor mode.
Yeah. No.
If you hover your mouse at the left, right button corner.
Right or left? Right or left?
Right button. Lower, please. Lower.
I'll try. Maybe. Is it the same?
Yeah, just click that button. Yeah, that one.
Okay.
Super, thank you.
Sorry. In Moldova, the supervision is a quite new reality, equally as the field in which it has appeared and it is applied. It is the social assistance. The social assistance, it is a quite, in its contemporary understanding, was developed step by step, and it was developed with the support of various international projects. And one of the development stages was the introduction of the notion of supervision in 2008, in compliance with those needs which existed in the social assistant field. So in 2008 and 2009, two documents were approved. The first was the mechanism of supervision. And in 2009, it was followed by a guide for the application of the mechanism. These are quite detailed documents. It was approved by the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection. After a period of piloting and application, in 2017, the mechanism was revised, and this time it was decided that a single document would suffice, containing the mechanism and the application guide. The guide from 2008 was focused on community social assistants and social workers, so these were the only supervised categories, while in 2017, already the application was extended on all the employees of the territorial social assistance structures which interact with beneficiaries. So the whole social assistant system is covered. The supervision doesn't have an uniform application towards the country. In some institutions, it is absolutely unplanned and informal. So according to the mechanism, it has to be applied respecting a series of formalities. I mean, the annual plan of meetings, individual meetings, group meetings. Each meeting has to have agenda, has to have a report. But in a lot of institutions, these are lacking. And the quality of this process depends absolutely on the competence and responsibility of the involved human resources, starting with high-level managers and so on. Some districts apply very well the supervision in Moldova, some absolutely not apply it well or at all. The process has improved after 2012, because in 2012, the accreditation of services was approved and started to be implemented. The supervision is done in a cascade system, going from superior managers to community social assistants or social workers. The supervision in social assistance is valid for all the work the staff is doing. This means that both related to children, but also to old people, vulnerable people, and so on. There is no supervision adapted specifically to a certain field as, for example, the child protection. Professionals from the multidisciplinary teams, as would be, for example, and which are not part of the social assistance as medical staff, education staff, and police staff, do not benefit from supervision in the formal understanding as provided by the existing mechanism. The functionality of supervision has been affected by a long series of challenges in Moldova, and the main challenges are very general. So for the whole social assistance field, as like the high turnover of staff seems to be the main challenge for a good application of the supervision practice. The system accepts unprepared people without relevant studies, and supervisors are in the situation to do much more work than is normal, as a new specialist demands a lot of time, and in the same time, supervisors have their work to do. Some experts in Moldovan, from the Moldovan NGOs, considers that supervisors have to be people fully dedicated to this job, eventually experts from outside the system, but which know very well the child protection system and can offer relevant support to specialists, raising their level. The big work involved by supervision is an additional unpaid work. The supplementary salary for this part of the job is present in very rare cases and is symbolic, so there is no motivation for doing supervision. Managers benefit only theoretically from supervision. They need more guidance, mentoring, and training, which ideally should be ensured by the National Social Assistance Agency. For the great majority of the social services, existing supervision doesn't cover, in reality, stress and burnout, and supervision involves substantial paperwork, which could be simplified. Another series of challenges relate to the fact that the Ministry and the National Agency for Social Assistance are not involved in the practical application of supervision. So the supervision is not in the National Social Agency training, Social Assistance Agency training curricula. There was some training and promotion only when the mechanism appeared, but once the projects which supported the creation and respectively the revision of the mechanism have finalized, all the trainings on this subject have ended. Another problem is the inappropriate publication of the mechanism of supervision and its limited accessibility. As one of our interview has said, our central authorities approve various orders, but are not careful enough that these orders are publicized and easily accessible. Sometimes we find after a long period that there is an order which regulates certain aspects. The policies should be found on the ministry webpage, but you don't find them because the ministry suffered various transformations in the last years, and the web page is new. Supervision is absolutely necessary, and everyone confirmed that during the research. It has the potential to improve significantly the state of things in the child protection and in the whole social assistance field. But now we have a lot of problems. So those problems which relate generally to the social assistance. So if the following objectives are achieved, in the social assistance, then this would inherently raise the supervision impact and its application at another qualitative level. And we speak here about reducing staff turnover, ensuring decent salaries in social assistance, motivate people from improving their knowledge, for transmitting their knowledge further, introducing a system of rewards for the work in social assistance, elaborating good web pages at the central and local level with all the policies publicized and easily available, and including, sure, the supervision policy there. As regards specifically to the supervision, the following actions needs to be implemented for improving the state of things. A training program needs to be ensured for supervisors, and we speak both about continuous formation training and initial formation training. We have to change the existing practice and appoint in the supervisor role employees which do only supervision and don't have other job duties. We have to elaborate clear procedures of supervision for each social service. We have to define the role of the National Social Assistance Agency in supervision. The National Social Assistance Agency, which presently do not interfere with the supervision mechanism, should have an active role in guiding and improving the supervision practice. It should be responsible for organizing trainings, preferably according to a TOT method, so that the knowledge is transmitted further more quickly in cascade system in the respective district. We should reduce paperwork effort in supervision through maximizing automatization, introducing pre-completed forms easy to fill in. And we should regulate the practice of supervision primarily in the law. An appropriate law for this purpose would be the law on social services. And there are not all the important things about supervision in Moldova. There are a lot of things which are very interesting. I would mention only two of them, like the fact that some experts consider that the supervision needs to be extended to all the multidisciplinary members. So here I mean the education, police, and medical staff, so all these which are outside the social assistance system have to benefit from supervision. There are also an interesting finding regarding the fact that we can consider that the mechanism of supervision is not actually a binding document from the legal point of view, because it was not published properly in the official Gazette of the Republic of Moldova, but it becomes binding because the procedures which are adopted at each social service, so each social service adopts a procedure on supervision, which transforms basically the supervision in the binding document. I'll stop here since we don't have too much time, but I hope that we can discuss further in the groups regarding other findings from the report on supervision. Thank you. And if there are questions.
Thank you, Olivia, for the work and for sharing the recommendations for Moldova. It is very interesting, actually, just to emphasize what you mentioned, the importance of having supervision for other team members of the multidisciplinary team, such health workers. It is of a crucial importance. The next, so in case of questions for Olivia, please feel free to write it in the chat box. And while we'll move to the next presentation, next country in the list, it is Serbia. Maria, are you connected?
Yes, yes, I am.
Great. So Maria, just a short intro about Maria. She is a social worker that with a master's degree in labor and social law and with more than 10 years of professional experience with vulnerable categories, and has as well an extensive experience in different research related with child protection and child care. Maria will be introducing us the report for Serbia. Please, Maria.
Thank you, Alketa, for the introduction. I will share my screen now. Just let me know about presentation.
Yes.
Is everything okay? Okay.
Yes.
So I'm very happy that we have a large number of participants from Serbia today, and I'm happy to present those results. So I will try to be very concise with these key results, and also you can see some interesting photos of Serbia in my presentation. I know that this is the 7th presentation for the day, so I think that you still have a patience to listen to these results. I would start with example of our participants from the research, which is one example of good practice where supervision is very helpful, and how our participants, what they think about the supervision. So this quote is about that supervisor supported our participants to find new strengths in the family when she was stuck in the work, when she didn't know what to do anymore, and she thought that separation of child from the family will be there. So supervision and her supervisor helped her to recognize new strengths and to keep a family together, which is very, very important. So I would like just to emphasize that we, in this research, we put a focus on institutions in the social protection system. So our sample was, we wanted actually to include professionals, supervisors and supervisees from centers for social work, centers for family accommodation and adoption, institutions for accommodation of children, academics, and representatives of civil society organizations who are very important also as a service providers. And we wanted to see how they stand with the provision of supervision in their teams. So we provided also this document analysis, key informant interviews, and we had these 20 survey participants from different parts of our country. What does the analysis of the document tell us? I would like to say that we analyzed the 2 important policy documents in Serbia as supervision started to implement in centers for social work in 2008 with the introduction of this rule book of norms, organizations and standards of centers for social work, and with the introduction of case management methodologies. So this document defines purpose of supervision and defines some conditions for supervisors, also putting a focus on different functions that supervision should apply, and something that is not defined in our policy documents is supervision for other service providers. So in this rule book, in this first rule book, there are some standards for work of supervisors in a center for social work, but when we analyze other rule book, for example, a rule book for foster care, which is, let's say, the main document in child protection area of this service provider, we find just that supervision is mentioned 3 times. So just very, very short, very low focus on supervision in this area. So also it is not defined how different service providers, let's say about civil society organization also who are providing services for children, how they should, for example, organize their their supervision. In this first rule book related to Center for Social Work, it is stated that supervision should be focused on administrative function during all phases of case management process, on assessment, on planning process, case review, case closure, but it is also there stated that it should have an educational and supporting function, but we will see how our research participants, what they think about this, because it seems that in Center for Social Work, we have mostly this administrative function, and there is not a space of supervisors to provide these two other important functions. So also, as we had the different actors in this research, we realized that we had also different experiences of supervisors from different institutions. So we have one reflection from supervisor from Center for Social Work and another from the Institution of Accommodation of Children and Youth. So at the first, as you can see here, I will not read it, but the main difference is in a model of supervision. In the institutions for accommodation of children and youth, we can see that we have this kind of more developing, more supportive functions of supervision. And it is not focused on management or control of the work, which is very much important to mention. But supervision in Center for Social Work is more focused on monitoring the process of working on a case and less on development and support of supervisees. And this is something that we get from supervisors, that they would really like this practice to be somehow changed in order to have more time, more space to deal with this developmental and supportive function of supervision. So what is the current state of supervision in Serbia? This is very in connection with key challenges actually in Serbia. So as we could see also from regional findings, supervision is provided and is accessible to Serbia, but our participants said that it is not enough. As you could see, we have participants from different contexts, different institutions. So they told us that it is important to have more supervision. Also, as I mentioned, our participant from Center for Social Work emphasized that supervision has a predominantly administrative function and there is not enough space for developmental and supportive function. And they're pretty agree on that this administrative function is very important during case management process because their supervisor is very supportive in the process. But the problem is when this function becomes predominant, so there is no space for others, there is no space for preventing burnout of professionals, on work on some improving skills and competencies and so on. So something that also we have here is that there is a great lack of human resources, especially in centers for social work, especially in the positions of case managers. And our participants stated that this affects quality of supervision as well. And that states, this is connected with the previous, that state does not invest enough in the field of social and child protection, which is also reflected in the supervision and especially in small number of supervisors, or with this is connected with overwhelmed of supervisors with different cases, and also case management who are overwhelmed with different types of families and they are working with. Also, there is not enough education for supervisors, and also that those education are not continuous. This is something that we could hear from our participants. and that supervision is not obligatory in institution for accommodation of children and youth. And one problem that they wanted to emphasize is that there is no established position of supervisors. So they would like to have supervision, and they have on a different ways. I will talk later about that, but there is no policy, no rule, no document about establishment of position of supervisor in institutions for accommodation of children. And also supervisors have double roles, which is very affecting the quality of supervision. This is something that we get from our participants because supervisors are at the same time case managers, and for example in centers for foster care and accommodation, they're at the same time counselor of foster family. So these double roles are very challenging for supervisors in Serbia. And here is how they perceive why supervision is so important. And our participants think that supervision is very much important, especially when we talk about work with children in child protection area. And also they recognize that it is an opportunity for learning and development. And I would just wanted to put attention on this awareness of our participants about the importance of supervision in self-care. I think that 90% of our participants let us know that it is very much important for them in order to prevent burnout, in order to recognize their own feelings, and to prevent vicarious trauma in working with children and families. Also, it is important for achieving quality in work and maintaining authentic interest in children and families, their life challenges, difficulties, and crises. This is also very much important because when we know with how many of cases our case managers are dealing with, supervision is very much important really to keep this authentic interest for children and families, and to prevent burnout actually. And also it is important because it enables professional exchange, resolves some ethical dilemmas, opens new possibilities, and enrich interventions of our professionals. I would just shortly present example of good practice. So as we could see in our centers for social work, we have established a position of supervisor with double roles and different challenges in their position, but in institutions for accommodation of established their workplace, supervision is organized between different work units, so they organize themselves somehow in order to help each other with this supervision that support that supervision provides. But they don't have policy, they don't have any kind of document and regulation with this field, but they are still trying to provide it for their professionals and to put a focus on this supportive and developmental function. So this was very interesting for us because we can see that those professionals are really aware of the importance of supervision, so that they just put it on their practice even if they didn't have any kind of regulation or any kind of document, but it is just based on their awareness of how much supervision is important for professionals, but important for services and intervention that they are providing to children. So another one, and this is the last slide about the recommendation of the research. So having in mind all these results so far, we think that it is necessary to improve policy level, but also practical level. And when we talk about policy level, it is very needed to expand the regulatory framework of supervision and define it as a standard in the work of all institutions and service providers, so that supervision can be available to all professionals in childcare system. Also, this new regulation or expanded regulation should define that supervisor has just the role of supervisor, not the other roles, as it is the situation in Serbia now. And also it is very important that state invests in the employment of new professionals in the social protection system so that workload of current professionals can be reduced. This is very much important for quality of supervision, but also for quality of work of those professionals. And also for the improvement of quality of supervision, this is on a practical level. It is necessary to ensure more trainings for supervisors, especially focused on child protection, like a specific area. And it would be useful to have more space for group supervision so that supervisees can learn from each other and from different experiences. So also one important thing is that additional researches should be conducted, because in Serbia we really don't have much researches related to supervision and its effectiveness on professionals, children and families. So this is from my side about the results. I would answer any questions, I think, other in our later in our big group. So you can put it on a chat, and yeah.
Thank you, Maria. And it is very interesting to see the importance of group supervision highlighted in every country report, almost. So now we'll move to the last country in the list. We have Bulgaria, and not the least for sure in terms of the importance of this report for the country. We have Milena Marinova. She's a psychologist and researcher in the same time, working in child protection department for more than 11 years, and with several years of experience working with victims of violence and with children. Milena will be introducing the report for Bulgaria, and I just leave her to continue further. Milena?
Thank you, Keta. It's not easy to be the last speaker, and I know you are a bit tired, but I want to draw your attention. My PowerPoint is very short, but it is very interesting. I'd share some photos from our capital, Sofia, in my presentation. Next slide, please. What we learned, I will start with the positive. There is a regulation in place to underpin supervision practice. Supervision is set in part in several regulations, but only for those working in social services for children. Long time there wasn't regulation for those working in the CPDs. In 2020, a new act for social services was adopted in our country. Their supervision is regulated for all those working on child protection, but this still has not been implemented because a subnormative framework is being developed. And the second, there is demand for and the supply of supervision as well as good practices. But unfortunately, supervision has not been studied enough. There are a few researchers of supervision, and they are mostly quantitative. Its effectiveness is not measured. It is a great challenge for us because we don't know about the quality of supervision and monitoring of supervisors' work. The standards of supervision are needed in child protection with regarding to quality of supervision. There aren't standards for supervision in our country. And there are dramatic issues stemming from the long-standing neglect of supervision in CPDs. That is a big problem in our country. The social workers on CPDs received supervision rarely, and only when there was project fundings. Next slide, please. Next slide shows respondents data. As you can see, we had 80 respondents. Most of them are working in the field of child protection, and most of them have experience in working in multidisciplinary teams. Most of participants as supervisees. On the right, you can see the breakdown of participants by professions. Next slide. Next 3 slides show snapshots of different aspects regarding the supervision. This slide shows multidisciplinary teams. The supervision is not applied in police, schools, etc., and is rarely for multidisciplinary teams. There is no regulation for supervision in multidisciplinary teams, but the respondents think that this will be very, very useful. They think the supervision can help them to think about the cases professionally and can develop their trust and encourage the team to achieve better results. Next slide. This slide shows our very important finding. In the system, there are 2 groups, CPDs and social services. They have different needs with regard to the supervision. The separation in 2 groups is informal because there is tendency to different supervision providing in both groups. That is normative frame, as I said. The workers from CPDs are focused on deadlines. They are thinking alongside the legislation frame. They need to find solution. And unlike them, the workers in social services don't work in that frame. As you can see from the quotes, we in CPDs, there aren't supervision even in complex cases. In the social services, the workers can talk about the clients with their supervisors and they can develop their capacity. Next slide. On this slide, I show the supervisor's opinion. We learned that supervision of child protection is applied and understood mainly as a form of emotional care for those working with children and families. And it's provided mainly by supervisors with a psychological and psychotherapeutic background. The supervisors in our research shared that the care for social worker is the main aim of supervision. They think that the manager could not be a supervisor because there is dependence between the manager and social worker, and that is not good in the supervisory relationship. They're thinking psychotherapeutic, and they provide a kind of psychological care in the supervision. Most of them have no experience in social work, especially in child protection. And next finish slide. Thank you. I realized it was a lot to digest in a very short time. Therefore, I'd like to invite you to read the report. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Milena, and thank you for the patience as well to go through all these researches and the colleagues. Yes, definitely, this was just to give the hints and the snapshots. The reports, the regional report and the country reports will have further elaborated information, and you can dig in on there, and will be soon uploaded in ChildHub, the platform, so easy to be accessed from your side. Okay, so in terms of time management, I will do my best to finish on time and go through all the agenda sections. Now we have the country report discussions, but not only focus on the report, but as well on the recommendations. Therefore, you will be going in the breakout rooms. Tamas, can you help me with the details of the breakout rooms?
Dear, I have just opened the breakout rooms. So please click on the country name where you would like to join. All the country groups will be in the local language. Of course, expect the English because that will be in English. So please join the groups where you would like to have a short question and answer session.
Yeah, exactly. So in the breakout rooms, you'll have the opportunity to receive answers for the questions that you have been raising. And hopefully, if you'll manage to go as well and through some recommendations, in particular for the advocacy part. And we'll be back in the plenary here at 1. So we have around 11 minutes for the discussions. And I see already some people leaving us in the plenary.
How do I join a group? Am I missing?
David?
You see the pop-up?
Yeah, so
there should be a breakout room pop-up where you can join the group. At the end of the row, you should see like English International.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
There.
Yeah. I got it. I'll go in the English one. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. So dear participants, if you still was not able to join any of the breakout group rooms, please in the pop-up of the breakout rooms, if you collapse the unassigned option, then you should see the country options with a blue join button. So please just check them and try to join. Thank you.
Hello, hello. Hi again. I think, is everybody back, Tamas?
In a minute, they will be back. I just clicked the end button. So in 47 seconds, they will be back.
Okay. I hope for the others who are already, you managed to have some questions and answers responded by our local associates and researchers as well. And hopefully we'll manage, we are all aware of the time limitations, especially when you have such a format of so many countries, so much content to share. And it becomes a bit challenging to transmit all the information. So, Tamas, can I continue or I wait a bit more?
5 seconds, please.
Okay, I cannot, okay, great.
We are back now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining again in the last discussion, but as well for us is this the opportunity to wrap up a bit. A special thank you from my side and all on behalf of Child Protection of ChildHub team for the local associates, for all the work that they have been doing and for the great presentations that you did today. And of course, special thanks to David for all his hard work and considering all the time limitations. And I guess especially for the translators that have been doing a great job on providing translation on real time. It is a special thank you from our side to you. So maybe for some of you, you are not aware, but for the others who are aware, ChildHub today, actually, some of the activities of ChildHub conducted offline will be ending. So really, on behalf of the team, we are really grateful to all the partners, the community of practitioners and everybody else who have been making ChildHub such of a success, if I may say. And I will leave the last words today to Judith, our colleague. She will be sharing with you the way how we think will be the future for ChildHub. Judith?
Thank you. You have taken the words out of my mouth. I wanted to say that we have come to the end of the conference, but unfortunately we have also come to an end of an era, the end of the project of ChildHub. And we would like to thank our donors, the Austrian Development Agency and Oak Foundation, for allowing us to implement this project and I wasn't believing this, 7.5 years. It's quite a long time. And a really big and special thank you for the dedicated team of national associates who were instrumental in making ChildHub a successful project, as well as our valued resource people who are here with us as well today, our ambassadors who have tirelessly worked with us for the enhancement of child protection. I'm really sorry we could not meet this time and for the past 2 years, and I recognize how much we have missed because of this. However, I do want to stress that ChildHub does not stop here. The online space will continue to operate, and we would like to invite you all to keep sending us news, publications, training materials, or webinar ideas. Please know that the ChildHub is yours as well. We would love to promote your work, host your webinars, your news, and your research. We also will continue with a dedicated group of volunteers who have been helping us translating and summarizing a lot of the materials. So ChildHub says goodbye with in-country activities, but we would like to welcome a new era where we continue collaborating online, share our knowledge and resources using the hub. We also hope that we will be cooperating in different frameworks in the near future. So thank you very much for being with us, for sharing this very special event, sharing the knowledge around supervision. And thank you for all the work over these more than 7 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith, and everyone for being with us today, and wishing you a good day